Catherine Morrison knew the exact moment her house began to fail. It was September 1891, early morning in the Cascade foothills of Washington Territory, and her hands were doing what they had done for 40 years, reading stone. She knelt at the northeast corner of the foundation, fingers pressed against basalt that she and Thomas had set into mortar 31 years before. The stone was cool under her palm, dry, but something had changed. 2 inches. She took the small leather notebook from her coat pocket and made the notation in pencil. Northeast corner, September 12, 1891. Dropped 2 inches since April. The numbers did not lie. Numbers never did. Catherine was 67 years old. Her hair was gray, pulled back tight the way her father had taught her when she was 12 and working in his Aberdeen stone yard. Keep it back or lose it to the work, he had said. Stone does not care about vanity. Her hands were scarred across the knuckles from 40 years of chisel strikes. The scars were white against skin that had seen too much weather, too much work, too much time. She stood slowly. Her right knee made a small sound of protest. It had been making that sound since the winter of '89 when she slipped on ice carrying a load of chimney stone for the Patterson house in town. The knee worked. It simply complained about working. She had learned to ignore complaints. The house rose behind her in the morning light. 2 stories, steep pitched roof to shed the snow that came heavy in these mountains every winter. Stone foundation that went down 30 inches below grade, deeper than most men dug because most men did not understand frost heave the way her father had understood it. Walls of Douglas fir that Thomas had selected himself from the mill, checking each board for grain, for weight, for the way it would hold a nail and hold it true. They had built this house together in 1860. She was 36. He was 38. They had no children yet and would never have them, though they did not know that then. What they had was each other and a shared language of measurement and level and plumb. Thomas would mark a line with his architect's pencil, and she would set the stone to meet it, and they rarely needed to speak because the work spoke for them. He had been dead 7 years now. The house remembered him anyway. She could see him in every corner. The way the roofline met the sky at exactly the pitch he had calculated for snow load. The way the windows faced south to catch winter sun and north to catch summer breeze. The way the foundation stones fit together with joints so tight you could not slip a knife blade between them. That was her work, the stones. She walked the perimeter now the way she did every morning, 24 feet along the north wall, 36 feet along the east. The morning ritual of inspection that most people would have found tedious but that she found necessary. You did not own a house. You maintained it. There was a difference. 3/4 of the way down the east wall she stopped, put her hand flat against the foundation stone, felt the texture of the basalt under her palm, the slight roughness where weather had worked at the surface for 3 decades, tapped it with her knuckle, listened. The sound came back solid, dense, the way stone should sound when it was set properly and still holding properly after all these years. She permitted herself a small moment of satisfaction, then she moved on. The workshop stood separate from the house, 20 yards to the west, smaller structure, single-story stone foundation that she had built herself after Thomas died. She needed the work then. Needed something to do with her hands that was not grief. The workshop had given her that. Inside, Thomas's tools hung on the wall, his drafting compass, his T-square, his collection of pencils in the wooden box he had made to hold them, each slot exactly wide enough for 1 pencil and no more. He had been precise about everything. She took down the level, 3 feet long, walnut wood, brass fittings that Thomas had polished every month whether they needed it or not. The bubble sat perfectly centered between the lines. It always did. Thomas had never owned a tool that did not work exactly as it should. She was putting the level back when she heard the buggy. The sound came from the road below, the main route that ran from Olympia to the mountain settlements. One horse, steady pace. Not a farmer's wagon, something lighter. A rig from town. Catherine set the level back on its pegs and walked to the front of the property. The buggy came into view around the bend. Black paint, brass fittings, professional rig. Behind it she could see a second rider on horseback. Her son Daniel sat in the buggy. She recognized his posture before she could see his face. Straight-backed, formal. The way he had carried himself since law school, since Portland, since he had decided that being an architect like his father was not ambitious enough and that law was the path to respect. The man beside him was not Elizabeth, Daniel's wife. This was someone older, heavier, carrying a leather case. Catherine stood in the yard and waited. She did not go to meet them. They were coming to her. Let them come. Daniel climbed down from the buggy. He was 43 years old and looked like his father had looked at 43 before the long sickness that took him in 1884. Tall, lean, good hands that should have been building things but instead shuffled papers in a Seattle office. "Mother," Daniel said. "Catherine." The man with the leather case descended more carefully. He was perhaps 50, running to fat the way men did when their work was sitting instead of moving. His suit was expensive. His collar was very white. Daniel gestured to the man. "This is Mr. Howard Simmons. He is an attorney." Catherine looked at Simmons, looked back at Daniel. "We need to discuss your situation," Daniel said. Catherine was still holding the level. She realized this and set it carefully against the workshop wall. "What situation is that?" she said. Daniel glanced at Simmons. Simmons opened his leather case and removed a sheaf of papers. "Mrs. Morrison," Simmons said. His voice was smooth, professional, the voice of a man who had said difficult things to difficult people many times before. "Your son has expressed concern about your living arrangements." Catherine said nothing. "You are 67 years old," Simmons continued. "You live alone in a property that requires maintenance beyond what can be reasonably expected of a woman of your years." "I maintain it fine," Catherine said. "The foundation is settling," Daniel said. "I can see it from here." 2 inches, Catherine said. "Northeast corner. I have already calculated the regrading work needed. The materials will cost $11. I can do the labor myself." Daniel's expression changed. Something flickered across it, not quite surprise, more like discomfort. "Mother," he said, "that is exactly the kind of thing we are concerned about. You should not be doing that kind of work at your age." "Why not?" "Because it is not safe, because you could be injured, because there are men who can do this work and you should hire them." "I am a mason," Catherine said. "I have been a mason for 40 years. I know how to move stone." Simmons cleared his throat. "Mrs. Morrison, perhaps we should discuss the legal matter at hand." He laid the papers on the hood of the buggy, straightened them with hands that had never done physical work. Under the Washington Territory Guardianship Act of 1889, Simmons said, "A petition may be filed for persons of advanced age who demonstrate diminished capacity to manage their own affairs. Your son has filed such a petition with Thurston County Court." Catherine felt something go very still inside her. "Without notifying me." The law allows ex parte proceedings when there is concern that notification might lead to actions detrimental to the subject's welfare. Translation, Catherine thought. They did this behind my back because they knew I would fight it. Simmons continued. "The court heard testimony from Dr. Pemberton regarding your mental state. He has provided a written assessment based on observations from the community." Dr. Pemberton has never examined me, Catherine said. He has observed your behavior over a period of months. He notes that you continue to engage in manual labor inappropriate for a woman of your age, that you live in isolation with minimal social contact, that you have refused reasonable suggestions from concerned parties to seek more appropriate living situations. I do my work, I live in my house. What is inappropriate about that? Simmons looked uncomfortable for the first time. The court has granted the petition, he said. Daniel Morrison is hereby appointed guardian of your person and your estate. He will manage your property and your financial affairs. You will retain the right to reside in the family home, but all decisions regarding the property will now require his approval. Catherine looked at Daniel. He could not quite meet her eyes. "Show me," she said. Simmons handed her the papers, legal language dense and formal, but the meaning was clear enough. Her house was no longer hers. Daniel stepped forward. "Mother, I know this seems harsh, but we are trying to help you. Elizabeth's father made me understand that if something happened to you and I had not acted, people would question whether I had done my duty as your son. So this is about what people think. This is about making sure you are safe. I am safe in my own house." "The house needs repairs you cannot afford," Daniel said. His voice was firmer now, as if he had practiced this. "The roof will need replacing within 2 years. That is $400 minimum. The foundation work you mentioned. The chimney needs repointing. You have $73 in your account at the Olympia Bank. How do you propose to pay for these repairs?" "I will do the work myself." "You are 67 years old." "I am aware of my age." "Then you should be aware of your limitations." Catherine looked at her son for a long moment, at this man who looked like his father but spoke like a stranger. "What are you planning to do with my house?" she said. Daniel glanced at Simmons. "Sell it," he said. "The property is worth approximately $200. We will invest the proceeds for your care at St. Anne's Home for Aged Women in Seattle. The monthly cost is $18. You will be comfortable there. You will have meals provided and company and care appropriate to your needs." Catherine did the mathematics in her head. It took her perhaps 3 seconds. $200, she said. "Minus your attorney's fees of what, $40? Minus the cost of moving me to Seattle, call it $15. That leaves $145 principal. At 4% annual return, that is $5.80 per year. $18 per month is $216 per year." She looked at Daniel. "Your plan has me penniless in 8 months. What happens then?" Daniel said nothing. "The church has benevolence funds," Simmons said. Catherine turned and walked toward the house. She did not run. She did not storm. She simply walked, steady pace. The pace of a woman who had walked this path for 31 years and knew every stone in it. "Mother," Daniel called. She kept walking. "Get out of my house," she said. She did not raise her voice, did not need to. Behind her she heard Simmons say something, heard Daniel's voice, lower, responding. Then the sound of the buggy turning, the horse's hooves on the packed earth of the yard. She stood on the front porch and watched them leave. The house rose behind her. Her house, Thomas's house, the house they had built with their hands and their knowledge and 31 years of care. Not hers anymore. The law said so. The next 8 weeks passed in a kind of careful numbness. Catherine moved through her house like a guest. She did her work. She inspected the foundation every morning. She made her notes in the small leather book, but there was a quality of unreality to it now. Daniel returned twice, once with Elizabeth, who looked uncomfortable and said very little, once with two men from town who measured the rooms and made notes on a pad and talked about Catherine as if she were not standing right there. The house will show well, one of them said. Good bones. The foundation needs work, the other said. Nothing major. Prospective buyers will understand. Catherine stood in the kitchen and said nothing. When they left, she went to the workshop and burned all of her personal letters, every piece of correspondence she and Thomas had exchanged during the 2 years they courted, every note he had left her in all the years of their marriage. Small things, affectionate things, the private language of two people who loved each other. She would not let strangers read them. People in town knew what was happening. News traveled in small communities. When Catherine walked to the general store for supplies, conversation stopped. Eyes followed her, not with malice, with pity, which was worse. Reverend Porter came to the house in the 6th week. He sat in the kitchen and drank the coffee she offered him and struggled to find the right words. Catherine, he said finally, Daniel means well. I am sure he does. At your age, perhaps some rest. I do not need rest, I need my house. Porter looked down at his coffee. He was a good man, sincere, but bound by the same social conventions that bound everyone else. I wish I could help, he said, but the law is clear. Yes, Catherine said, it is. After he left, she stood in the kitchen for a long time. The kitchen where she and Thomas had eaten breakfast every morning for 23 years, where they had planned their days and discussed their work, and simply existed together in the comfortable silence of long companionship. She touched the counter, stone countertop that she had set herself, choosing each piece for color and grain, running her hand along it now, feeling the smooth surface that 40 years of use had polished to a soft luster. In the 7th week, Mary Chen came. Mary was 48, widow of Li Chen, who had died in the anti-Chinese violence of 1885. She ran the sawmill supply store on the edge of town and did not suffer fools or injustice quietly. She brought a basket of food, set it on the table without ceremony. I heard, she said. Catherine nodded. They tried this with me, Mary said. After Li died, said Chinese woman could not run business, said I should sell and go back to family in San Francisco. What did you do? I stayed, they burned the mill. Catherine looked at her. I built new one, Mary said, smaller. They gave up trying to move me. She sat down at the table. You are stronger than they think, she said. Do not let them make you forget that. In the 8th week, Jacob Reeves came. Jacob was 72. He had been Catherine's father's apprentice in the old days, back in Aberdeen before the family came to America. He was mostly bedridden now, joints too stiff with arthritis to work anymore. But he had made the trip from town in a borrowed wagon just to see her. They sat in the workshop. Jacob ran his hand along the workbench. Your father taught me on bench like this, he said. 19 years old and stupid, thought I knew everything. Catherine smiled slightly, first time in weeks. He taught you the stone sense, she said. How to read it, how to listen to what it wants to be. Jacob looked at her. He taught you better than he taught me. I had more time to learn. That is not why, you have gift for it, same as he did. They sat quietly for a moment. Catherine, Jacob said, your father taught me rule. Stone remembers who shaped it. You shaped half this town. Do not let them forget. I am 67, Jacob. I am tired. Then rest after you prove them wrong, not before. She walked him to the wagon, watched him drive away. Old man in a borrowed wagon, arthritic and bent, but with more spine than half the healthy men in town. That evening, Catherine began to pack. She had a canvas traveling bag that she and Thomas had taken on their one trip together, a journey to Seattle in 1871 to see the new city rising from the timber and mud. The bag was worn now but still sound. Into it she placed Thomas's drafting compass, brass and steel, precise enough to mark angles to the quarter degree. Their wedding photograph, tintype from 1856, both of them young and serious, standing very straight the way people did for cameras back then. Her father's mason hammer. He had brought it from Scotland in 1848. The handle was ash wood, darkened with age and use. The head was forged steel that would outlast anyone who held it. Thomas's sketchbooks, 12 volumes spanning 1855 to 1884, his entire professional life documented in measured drawings and careful notes. She left the furniture, left the kitchen goods, left everything that could be sold or distributed or simply abandoned. What mattered fit in one bag. On the morning of October 14th, 58 days after Daniel's first visit, Catherine Morrison stood in the yard of the house she had built and lost. The hired men would arrive at noon to begin clearing the property. Daniel had sent word, professional and thorough, he would handle everything. She picked up her bag. She did not look back at the house as she walked down the drive. Looking back served no purpose. The road to town was 11 miles. She walked it in 3 hours and 20 minutes. Her knee complained. She ignored it. Olympia was a small town, population maybe 1,500. Big enough for a courthouse and a bank and several churches. Small enough that everyone knew everyone else's business. Catherine walked to the courthouse without stopping at the general store or the bank or anywhere else someone might try to speak to her. She did not want sympathy. She wanted something else. The courthouse was federal-style brick, 2 stories, with a cupola on top that served no function except to announce importance. Inside it smelled of old wood and lamp oil, and the particular mustiness of records that accumulated faster than anyone could organize them. A clerk sat at a desk in the main hall. Young man, maybe 25, with ink stains on his fingers and the slightly hunched posture of someone who spent his days writing. Auction notice board, Catherine said. He pointed without looking up, west wall. The board held perhaps 30 notices. Tax sales, foreclosures, estate liquidations, the ordinary commerce of property changing hands. Catherine scanned them methodically, started at the top left, worked her way across and down. And found it. Thurston County Tax Foreclosure Auction. October 15, 1891. Properties condemned or tax delinquent. Opening bids from 25 cents. Item 14. Stone Cabin, Cascade Foothills, 18 miles east of Olympia, approximately 900 square feet, constructed circa 1847, abandoned 1865, severe structural failure, no road access, condemned by county inspection 1889, minimum bid 50 cents. Catherine read it twice. 18 miles east. She knew that location. She had been there once, 35 years ago, with Thomas on their honeymoon trip into the mountains. They had found a ruined cabin in a high meadow, beautiful stonework, unlike anything else they had seen in Washington Territory. Thomas had spent 3 days sketching it, measuring it, trying to understand how it had been built. She had not thought about that cabin in years. Now she stood in the courthouse corridor with $4.15 in her purse and read the auction notice for a property that no one else would want. Stone cabin condemned, no road access. Minimum bid 50 cents. Catherine checked the courthouse clock, 2:15 in the afternoon. Auction was tomorrow at 1. She walked to the general store, bought 3 days of food with $1.40. Hardtack, dried meat, coffee, nothing that needed cooking, nothing that would spoil. That left her with $2.75. She spent the night on a bench outside the courthouse. No one bothered her. Old women on benches were invisible. October 15th broke cold and clear. Catherine washed her face at the public pump, ate a piece of hardtack, drank water from her cupped hands. At 12:30, she walked into the courthouse. The auction room was on the ground floor, perhaps 30 feet by 40, with tall windows on the east wall and a raised platform at the front where the auctioneer would stand. 18 men occupied the room when Catherine entered. Most were in their 30s and 40s, farmers looking for timber land, merchants looking for investment property, a few speculators who made their living buying low and selling high. They stood in clusters, talking quietly, the easy familiarity of men who had attended these auctions before. Catherine sat on a bench in the back corner, set her canvas bag beside her, folded her hands in her lap. Several of the men glanced at her. A woman at a property auction was unusual. A woman of her age was peculiar. They looked and looked away. Edward Graves, the county assessor, entered at 10 minutes to 1. He was perhaps 55, lean and weathered, with the permanent squint of someone who spent his days reviewing documents in bad light. He took his position at the front, opened his ledger. "Gentlemen," he said, "let us begin." The auction proceeded efficiently. Properties announced, bids solicited, sales recorded. Graves moved through them at a steady pace. No wasted time, no unnecessary commentary. Lot 7, timber parcel, 12 acres, Nisqually River access. Opening bid $5. Sold for $18 to a mill owner named Patterson. Lot 9, residential property, Olympia town limits, fire damaged. Opening bid $2. Sold for $7 to a merchant named Webb. Lot 13, agricultural land, 40 acres, creek access, suitable for dairy. Opening bid $12. Sold for $31 to a farmer Catherine did not recognize. Then Graves consulted his ledger, and his expression changed slightly. The look of a man who had saved the most problematic item for last. Lot 14, he said. Stone cabin, Cascade foothills, 18 miles east of Olympia, approximately 900 square feet. Constructed circa 1847. Abandoned 1865. He paused. No road access past 16-mile marker. Structure has been condemned by county inspection. Severe roof failure. Foundation undermining from creek erosion. Interior damage from weather exposure and wildlife occupation. One of the men laughed. Wildlife occupation, he said. That means raccoons. Graves consulted his notes. The inspection report does note evidence of animal habitation. How much animal habitation? The report lists raccoons, possums, and possible cougar. More laughter. Graves continued reading. County recommendation is demolition. However, the stone may have salvage value. Opening bid 50 cents. The room went quiet. Graves looked up. Gentlemen, 50 cents. No one spoke. The access situation makes salvage impractical, someone said. 2 miles on foot carrying stone. Not worth the labor. Graves nodded. Nevertheless, 50 cents. Do I have a bid? Silence. Going once, Graves said. Catherine stood. Every head in the room turned. 50 cents, she said. Her voice carried clearly in the quiet room, not loud, simply clear. Graves peered over his spectacles at her. Ma'am, Do you understand the condition of the property being described? I understand it is a stone cabin, structurally unsound, no access, condemned status. I bid 50 cents. The room stirred. Men looked at each other. This was not what anyone had expected. A man named Logan, perhaps 40 years old, turned in his seat. "Ma'am," he said, "that property is 18 miles into wilderness. The last 2 miles have no road. You would have to carry everything on foot." Catherine looked at him. "Did I ask for your assessment of the difficulty?" Logan's face colored slightly. "No, ma'am, but at your age." "At my age, I am still capable of accepting a legally binding bid. Mr. Graves, do you require further clarification?" Graves cleared his throat. "Any other bids?" The room remained silent. No one wanted to bid against an old woman, even for 50 cents. It would look cruel. "Going once," Graves said. "Going twice." He brought down his gavel. "Sold lot 14 to, I am sorry, your name?" "Catherine Morrison." She walked to the front, counted out 50 cents in coin, placed it on the desk. Graves filled out the deed transfer, signed it, slid it across to her. She signed below his signature. "Catherine Morrison, October 15, 1891. "The property is yours," Graves said, "though I feel obligated to note that the county strongly discourages habitation." "Noted," Catherine said. She folded the deed, put it in her coat pocket, picked up her bag. As she walked toward the door, Logan stood. "Mrs. Morrison," he said, "I have seen that property. There is nothing there, I mean no disrespect, but—" "Then I did not overpay," Catherine said. She walked out of the courthouse into the October afternoon. Behind her she heard one of the men say something, heard laughter, not cruel, just the uneasy laughter of men who had witnessed something they did not quite understand. Catherine stood on the courthouse steps. She owned a condemned building 18 miles from anywhere. She had $2.25 remaining. She had no tools except what she carried, no supplies except 3 days of food, no plan except to go to the place she had just purchased and see what was there. The sun was past its peak, maybe 2 o'clock, 4 hours of good daylight left. She started walking. 3 blocks from the courthouse she passed the Presbyterian church. Reverend Porter was on the steps, talking to a parishioner. He saw her, his expression changed. "Catherine," he said, "I heard about," he gestured vaguely, "the auction." "Yes," Catherine said. She kept walking. "Where will you go?" "To my property." "Catherine, that place is not, you cannot." She stopped, turned to look at him. "Reverend Porter," she said, "for 8 weeks people have told me what I cannot do. I am no longer interested in hearing it." She walked on. At the edge of town she passed the sawmill supply store. Mary Chen was outside, loading a wagon. She saw Catherine, set down the board she was carrying. "You bought it," she said, "the condemned cabin." "Yes." "Good," Mary said. She walked to the wagon, pulled out a coil of rope, handed it to Catherine. "You will need this." "I cannot pay you." "Not selling, giving, call it investment in stubbornness." Catherine took the rope. "Thank you." Mary nodded. "Build something they have to look at every day. That is best revenge." Catherine walked east on the main road. The sun dropped toward the western peaks. Her knee complained. She ignored it. At 6 miles she passed the last homestead. After that the road belonged to the forest. At mile 16 the road ended. Beyond it a trail, overgrown, barely visible. She kept walking. The trail climbed. Steep grade, loose stone underfoot. Forest pressed close on both sides. Douglas fir, western red cedar, hemlock, trees that had been here when the cabin was built and would be here long after she was gone. The light was failing when she reached the meadow. The cabin sat in the center of it. Small structure, maybe 24 feet by 36. Stone walls dark against the grass. Roof entirely gone, rafters collapsed inward like broken ribs. Catherine stood at the edge of the clearing. This was the place she and Thomas had found in 1856. She recognized it. The way the meadow sloped toward the creek, the particular peak visible to the east, the arrangement of the stones. 35 years ago, Thomas had sat in this meadow and sketched, trying to understand how someone had built so well in such a remote place. Now Catherine crossed the meadow. Her boots made soft sounds in the grass. She reached the cabin, set down her bag, walked slowly around the perimeter. The walls stood, that was something. Stone courses were still level, no obvious collapse. She knelt at the foundation, put her hands on the stone. Cool and solid under her palms. Basalt, probably from a local outcrop. Good dense stone that would hold weight. She tapped it with her knuckle, listened to the sound that came back. Solid, true. Whoever built this had known what they were doing. She stood, walked to the door opening. The door itself was long gone. Inside, the cabin was open to the sky. Roof debris covered everything. Years of accumulated leaves, animal droppings, broken wood from the failed rafters. But the walls were intact. She ran her hand along the interior stone, felt the joints, tight, no gaps, mortar still holding after 44 years. This was masterwork. The light was almost gone. Catherine gathered dry wood from the forest edge, built a fire in what had been the fireplace. The chimney still stood. The fire drew cleanly. She sat with her back against the stone wall, opened her canvas bag, took out a piece of hardtack, ate it slowly. The forest made its evening sounds around her, birds settling, small animals moving through underbrush, the creek running somewhere below the meadow. She was 67 years old. She owned a ruin 18 miles from the nearest town. She had $2.25 and 3 days of food. And for the first time in 8 weeks, sitting in this broken place with smoke rising through the skeleton of a roof, Catherine Morrison felt something like peace. The stone walls stood around her, built by someone long dead, built well enough to last. She put her hand against the stone, felt its solidity. Tomorrow she would begin. Tonight she would rest. The fire burned low. The stars came out through the broken roof. Catherine wrapped herself in her coat and closed her eyes. She did not know yet what she was building toward. But she knew how to build. That would be enough to start. The first morning told the truth. Catherine woke to cold that had worked its way through her coat and into her bones. The fire had died sometime in the night. Gray light came through the broken roof where stars had been. She sat up slowly. Her back had stiffened against the stone wall. Her knee made its familiar sound of protest. She was 67 years old and had slept on the ground in October in the Cascade Mountains, and her body was informing her precisely how foolish that had been. She stood anyway. The cabin looked worse in daylight. Darkness had been generous, hiding details in shadow. Morning took that generosity away. Debris covered everything. Decades of accumulated leaves compacted and rotting. Animal droppings in every corner. The floor, what remained of it, was a patchwork of gaps and broken boards. In the northeast corner, a section had failed entirely, revealing the crawlspace beneath. The walls still stood, she had to give them that. Stone did not rot the way wood rotted. Stone simply endured. Catherine walked the perimeter inside, 24 paces along the north wall, 36 along the east. Her boots crunched on broken wood and forest detritus. She stopped at the fireplace, put her hand on the stone chimney, ran her fingers up the interior wall, feeling the joints. They were tight. Whoever built this chimney had known the critical importance of tight joints in a structure that would contain fire. One gap, one space for smoke to escape where it should not, and the whole thing became a hazard. No gaps. She knelt and looked up into the flue. Birds had nested there, probably for years. The passage was partially blocked with twigs and dried grass, and the general accumulation of avian architecture. That would be first priority. A chimney that did not draw was no chimney at all. Catherine went outside. The morning was clear and cold. Frost sparkled on the meadow grass. The sun had not yet cleared the eastern peaks, but the sky held that particular quality of light that meant it would be a good day for work. She walked to the forest edge, found a long straight branch mostly dry, stripped the side branches with her hands. Not ideal, she needed a knife. She needed many things, but you worked with what you had. Back at the cabin, she fed the branch up into the chimney from below, pushed gently, met resistance. She pushed harder. The branch flexed. The nest material compressed but did not give way. She adjusted her angle, pushed again, felt something shift. A shower of debris came down. Twigs, grass, something that might have been a bird's skeleton. It fell into the firebox in a cloud of ancient dust. Catherine stepped back, waited for the dust to settle, fed the branch up again. This time it went through cleanly. She could see daylight at the top of the chimney. The flue was clear. She gathered dry wood from the forest, built a small fire in the fireplace. The smoke rose straight up. No backflow, no leakage through the stone. The chimney worked. That was one problem, solved out of perhaps 100. Catherine stood in the clearing and took inventory of what she faced. The cabin measured approximately 24 feet by 36 feet. Stone walls rose to 8 feet at the eaves. The roof structure had been timber framed, probably cedar, with a pitched roof steep enough to shed heavy snow. All of that structure had failed. The rafters had rotted through at key connection points and collapsed inward. What remained was a tangle of broken wood, weathered gray, home to insects and rot. The floor was cedar planking over floor joists. Perhaps 60% of the planks were sound. The other 40% had failed, leaving gaps that opened to the crawlspace below. 2 window openings punctuated the walls. No glass, no frames, just rectangular holes that let in weather and animals. The door opening faced south. No door. The frame had rotted away years ago. Water was the creek she could hear running somewhere below the meadow to the north. She would need to find it, establish a route, figure out how to carry water uphill. Food was what she had brought. 2 more days of hardtack and dried meat. After that, she would need to solve the problem of food or leave. Leaving was not an option she was prepared to consider. Catherine opened her canvas bag, took out Thomas's sketchbooks, sat on a relatively sound section of floor near the fireplace. She opened the first volume, Thomas's careful drafting dated 1855, buildings he had designed in the early years, small structures mostly, a church addition, a merchant's house, work that established his reputation. She paged through, found what she was looking for in the 3rd volume, August 1856. Thomas had dated the entry. Cascade cabin, elevation approximately 4,200 feet. Stone construction, superior craftsmanship, builder unknown. He had drawn the cabin from multiple angles, front elevation, side elevation, details sketches of the stonework showing how the courses were laid. And notes, so many notes in his small, precise hand. Mortar appears to be standard lime mixture, but joints are tighter than typical practice. Stone selection shows understanding of thermal properties. South wall uses dense basalt, north wall more porous stone. Intentional or fortunate coincidence. Foundation depth unknown, but settlement is minimal despite visible age of structure. Estimate construction date 1845 to 1850. Roof structure collapsed, but wall plates show evidence of queen post-truss system. Advanced technique for frontier construction. Catherine read every word. Thomas had spent 3 days here in 1856, measuring and sketching and trying to understand what made this cabin exceptional. She looked up from the sketchbook at the actual walls around her. He had been right. This was exceptional work. You could see it in the way the stones fit together, in the choice of materials, in the details that marked the difference between someone who built adequately and someone who built to last. Whoever made this had cared. Catherine closed the sketchbook, stood, walked to the north wall. Low on the wall, perhaps 3 feet from the floor, she found what she was looking for. A mark carved into the stone, letters cut clean and deliberate. H.W. 1847. The builder's signature. She traced the letters with her finger. H.W. someone with initials, someone with enough pride in their work to sign it, someone who built this cabin 44 years ago and then vanished from history. The morning sun reached the meadow. Catherine felt its warmth on her back. She had work to do. The first priority was the floor. You could not work effectively if you could not move safely through the space. The gaps were hazards. One misstep and she would be through to the crawlspace below. Catherine tested each board before putting weight on it, stepped carefully from sound section to sound section, mapped in her mind which areas were safe and which were not. The failed sections showed a pattern. The boards had rotted through where water had collected, probably from roof leaks that had gone on for years. The joists beneath were still sound. Good dense cedar that resisted rot better than most woods. She needed replacement boards, had no money to buy lumber. The solution was obvious. The forest had lumber. You just had to know how to find it and process it. Catherine walked into the trees with the rope Mary Chin had given her, looked for fallen cedar, not fresh fallen, not ancient rotten, something in between, dead long enough to have dried, recent enough to still be sound. She found a candidate 50 yards into the forest. Cedar log perhaps 14 inches in diameter, brought down by wind. The bark was loose, but the wood beneath looked good. She tested it with her boot, solid. The log was 20 feet long, too long to move whole. She would need to section it. Catherine had Thomas's folding saw in her bag. Small tool meant for finish work, not for felling timber, but it was what she had. She marked a section 6 feet long, began sawing. The work was slow. The saw was meant for smaller stock, but she had learned long ago that the right technique mattered more than the right tool. Steady pressure, even strokes. Let the saw do the work. It took 40 minutes to cut through. Her arms burned. Her back reminded her again that she was 67. The section fell free. She tied the rope around one end, began dragging it toward the cabin. The log weighed perhaps 80 pounds. Uphill through forest undergrowth it felt like twice that. She stopped 3 times to rest. Each time she stood with her hands on her knees, breathing hard, telling herself this was necessary. The log reached the cabin just after noon. Catherine sat on it and drank water from the creek. She had found the water source that morning. Small creek running clear over stones, 30 yards downslope from the cabin. The water was cold enough to make her teeth ache. She rested for 10 minutes, then she began the next part. Splitting the log into boards required wedges. She had none. What she had was stone and knowledge. From the forest she gathered river rocks, not round ones, angular ones, basalt that would fracture with sharp edges. Using one stone as a hammer and another as an anvil, she shaped crude wedges. The technique was old, older than metal tools. Her father had shown her once, talking about how the ancient builders had worked before iron. The wedges were rough but functional. Catherine positioned the first wedge in a natural crack in the log, struck it with a stone hammer. The wedge seated, the crack widened slightly. She added a second wedge 6 inches farther down the crack, struck it. The crack extended. Third wedge, fourth, working down the length of the log, opening the crack incrementally. On the 8th strike, the log split along its length with a sound like a gunshot. 2 halves now instead of 1 whole. She repeated the process on each half, split them again and again. By evening she had 8 rough planks, not smooth, not even, honest about what they were, wood shaped by stone and effort and nothing else. They would cover the failed floor sections. That night Catherine made a fire and heated water from the creek and ate her ration of dried meat. She was exhausted in a way she had not been exhausted in years. The kind of tired that came from physical work, sustained beyond what the body wanted to give. But the floor would be repaired tomorrow. That was worth being tired. She slept better the second night. Her body was learning to accept the ground, or maybe she was just too exhausted to care. Morning came cold again. Catherine woke, built up the fire, boiled water for coffee. She had been drinking coffee since she was 16 years old. Her father's rule: coffee in the morning means you are ready to work. No coffee means you are not serious. The coffee was bitter and strong, and exactly what she needed. The planks she had split yesterday were rough. They needed to be fitted to the gaps in the floor. That meant trimming them to length, shaping them to match the spaces they would fill. Catherine worked methodically, measured each gap with a length of rope marked with knots, transferred the measurements to the planks, cut them to size with Thomas's saw. The first plank took 2 hours to fit properly. The second took 90 minutes. By the fourth she had developed a rhythm. The gaps began to close. By afternoon she had repaired the northeast section, 8 feet by 6 feet of solid floor where there had been gaps and hazard. She stood on it, jumped slightly. The boards held. Progress. The third day she ran out of food. Catherine sat by the fire that evening with an empty bag and considered her options. She could walk back to Olympia, buy more supplies, but that was 2 days walking, 4 days total, and it would consume the last of her money. Or she could find food here. The forest provided if you knew how to look. Her father had taught her that. Scots knew about foraging, had too. The land gave grudgingly and you took what it offered. In the morning Catherine walked the forest edge, looked for cedar bark, found a dead tree with loose bark that peeled away in long strips. The inner bark was edible, not pleasant, but edible. You soaked it in water to remove the bitterness, boiled it until soft. She gathered enough for 3 days, stored it in a cloth bag. At the creek she found watercress growing in the shallows. She knew watercress. It grew in Scotland, in Washington, anywhere the water ran clean and cold. She picked enough for a meal, ate it raw with boiled cedar bark. It was not good, but it was food. That night, sitting by the fire, she took out Thomas's sketchbooks again. Paged through the volumes, found his later drawings, 1883, the year before he died. He had returned to this cabin, made detailed measured drawings, every dimension precisely noted, the stone courses, the window placement, the chimney dimensions. In the margin he had written, "If I ever build another house it will be this way. C would understand. See Catherine." He had planned to show her this place, had planned to build something together using what he had learned from studying this cabin. The sickness took him before he could do it. Catherine closed the sketchbook, sat looking into the fire. She had not cried when Thomas died, had not cried when Daniel took her house, had not cried through any of it because crying did not solve problems and she had always been a woman who solved problems. But sitting alone in a broken cabin in the mountains with cedar bark settling uneasily in her stomach and her husband's unfinished plans in her hands, she came close. Instead, she banked the fire and lay down and closed her eyes and told herself that morning would come, and there would be work, and work was what she knew how to do. The fourth day brought the first test of her repairs. Rain moved in before dawn. Catherine woke to the sound of it on what remained of the roof structure. Heavy rain coming straight down, the way October rain came in the mountains. Water poured through the broken roof, pooled on the floor in a dozen places. Catherine moved her bedding to the driest corner, watched the water spread. The floor sections she had repaired held. The water ran over them but did not seep through. The joints were tight enough. That was good. But the cabin was filling with water. Puddles became pools. The sound of dripping was everywhere. She needed to do something about the roof. The problem was obvious. No roof meant no shelter, but she had no lumber for rafters, no shakes for covering, no money to buy either. What she had was canvas tarp from her traveling bag, 8 feet by 10 feet, not enough to cover the whole roof, but enough to cover part of it. Catherine waited for the rain to ease. Late afternoon it dropped to a drizzle. She took the tarp outside, found 2 long poles from the collapsed roof structure, still sound enough to use. Draped the tarp over the poles, positioned them across the worst section of the failed roof, weighted the edges with river stones. It was not a roof. It was a temporary weather barrier, but it would keep rain off the center section of the cabin. That night, with the tarp overhead and the rain drumming on canvas instead of pouring directly onto her, Catherine felt something close to satisfaction. You solved the problems in front of you, one at a time, with what you had. That was building. The 5th day she woke to find someone standing in the clearing. Catherine came instantly alert, reached for her father's hammer. The figure was tall, male, standing at the edge of the forest looking at the cabin. She stood, walked to the door opening. The man turned at the sound. He was perhaps 70, gray hair, weathered face, moving with the careful deliberation of someone whose joints no longer bent easily. "Mrs. Morrison," he said. Catherine recognized the voice before she fully recognized the face. "Jacob Reeves." "Jacob," she said, "what are you doing here?" He walked closer, slowly, each step clearly costing him something. "I came to see if the rumors were true," he said, "that you bought a condemned property and vanished into the mountains, that you were probably dead." "I am not dead." No, Jacob looked at the cabin, at the tarp overhead, at the stack of split wood beside the fire. "No, you are not." He came inside, stood in the center of the repaired floor. "This is the work you have done." "Yes." Jacob knelt, ran his hand over the boards, tested a joint with his thumbnail. "Your father would be proud," he said. The foundation is still settling, Catherine said. Northwest corner. I need to address the drainage. Jacob walked to the northwest corner, examined it the way she had examined it, put his hands on the stone. Read it. "1/4 inch since you arrived," he said. "Yes." "That is nothing. You have stabilized it." He stood, looked at her directly. "Catherine," he said, "your father taught me for free when I was 16 and stupid. I cannot do the work anymore, arthritis, but I can teach. I cannot pay you. I am not asking for payment. I am offering knowledge. Once a month I will come up here. We will work together. You will finish this properly." "Why would you do that?" "Because your father would expect it, and because you are doing something worth doing." Catherine said nothing for a moment. Then she nodded. Jacob reached into his coat, pulled out a bundle wrapped in cloth. "I brought flour," he said, "and salt, and coffee that does not taste like punishment." He set it on the floor. "Mary Chen sends her regards. She would have come herself, but someone needs to mind the store." That evening, Catherine and Jacob sat by the fire and drank proper coffee and talked about stone. Jacob asked about her assessment of the foundation. She showed him her notebook, the measurements, the settlement patterns. He nodded at each one. "You read it correctly," he said. "The northwest corner is undermining from the creek, but the builder chose that location deliberately. See how the cabin sits, slightly elevated. The creek cannot rise enough to flood it even in heavy runoff. Whoever built this thought about water flow." "They thought about everything," Jacob said. "This is masterwork, frontier masterwork, which is different than city masterwork." "How?" "City mason has access to materials. He can choose. Frontier mason uses what the land provides. The mastery is in making local material serve the design." He pointed to the walls. "Look at the stone selection. South wall, dense basalt, holds heat from the sun. North wall, more porous stone, insulates against cold. Same material source. Different selection for different purpose." "That is intentional." "Completely." Catherine looked at the walls with new understanding. Jacob stood, stretched his back carefully. "I must go before dark," he said. "The trail down is not kind to old men." "When will you return?" "1 month, November 15th. Bring more supplies, and we will talk about the roof." He walked to the door, stopped. "Catherine," he said, "what you are doing here matters. Not just for you. For everyone who has been told they are too old or too weak or too whatever to do the work they know how to do. Prove them wrong." After he left, Catherine sat by the fire and opened the flour. Real flour, not cedar bark. She mixed it with water and a pinch of the salt Jacob had brought, shaped it into flat cakes, cooked them on a hot stone beside the fire. They were the best thing she had eaten in a week. The days developed a rhythm. Catherine woke at first light, built up the fire, boiled water for coffee, ate sparingly from the supplies Jacob had brought. Morning was for heavy work, splitting more timber, extending the floor repairs, clearing debris from the interior. Afternoon was for detailed work, studying the stone courses, checking the mortar, making notes in her leather book. Evening was for maintenance, sharpening tools on river stones, organizing materials, planning the next day. Night was for Thomas's sketchbooks. She read them by firelight, not just the Cascade cabin drawings, all of it, his early work, his mature designs, the progression of his thinking over 3 decades. And she began to see patterns. Thomas had been obsessed with this cabin, not obviously, but consistently. References appeared throughout the volumes, a window detail borrowed from the cascade design, a roof pitch that matched the failed structure, stone coursing techniques that echoed what she saw in these walls. He had been studying this place for 27 years, learning from a dead builder whose name he did not know. The 10th day brought the first snow. Catherine woke to white, not heavy, just a dusting, but enough to announce that winter was coming and she needed to be ready. The tarp overhead had developed a sag where snow collected. She went outside and brushed it off before the weight could tear the canvas. Snow changed everything. It made the work harder, made the cold more immediate, made the question of survival less theoretical. Catherine stood in the clearing and looked at what she had accomplished. The floor was repaired, solid and safe. The chimney worked, heat was possible. The tarp kept the worst weather off the center section. But it was not enough for winter, not nearly enough. She needed a real roof, needed to seal the window openings, needed to make this place genuinely weathertight. The problem was materials and knowledge. She had split cedar for floorboards, but roof rafters were different. They needed to support load, needed to be shaped precisely to join at the ridge, needed to be installed at the correct pitch to shed snow. Catherine was a mason. Thomas had been the carpenter. She sat by the fire that evening and opened his sketchbooks to the roof details. Thomas had drawn the failed roof structure, had measured it, had noted every dimension. Queen post truss system, his note said. Each rafter 2x 6-inch dimension, 16-inch centers, 6 and 12 pitch. He had reverse engineered the entire design from what remained. Catherine studied the drawings, read his notes, tried to understand what he was showing her. A roof was more than boards nailed together. It was a system, each piece dependent on every other piece. Get one angle wrong and the whole structure failed. She had never built a roof. But Thomas had documented this one completely. She had his drawings, his measurements, his notes. It would have to be enough. The 11th day, Catherine began cutting timber for rafters. She worked in the forest, found standing dead cedar, trees killed by fire or disease but still sound. The wood was lighter than green timber, easier to work, and already seasoned. Each tree she felled with patient work. The small saw, steady pressure, hours per tree. Each log she sectioned, dragged to the cabin, split into rough lumber. The work was brutal. Her hands developed new blisters over old calluses. Her back ached constantly. Her knees swelled. She worked anyway. By the 14th day, she had 12 rough timbers, each approximately 8 feet long, each split to roughly 2 inches by 6 inches. Not perfect, not even close to lumber yard quality, but serviceable. That evening Jacob returned. He came up the trail carrying a pack that looked too heavy for a man his age, but he made it to the cabin and set the pack down with visible relief. "I brought nails," he said, "and a draw knife. You will need both." Catherine showed him the timber she had prepared. Jacob examined each one, sighted along the length, checked for twist and warp. "These will work," he said. "Your father taught you to read wood grain." "He taught me to read everything." "Good, because now I will teach you to frame a roof." They worked through the afternoon, Jacob showing her how to mark the rafter angles, how to cut the bird's mouth joint where the rafter would sit on the wall plate, how to ensure each piece was identical to the others. The geometry mattered. Miss the angle by 1 degree and the rafters would not meet properly at the ridge. Catherine cut the first rafter under Jacob's guidance, set it in place on the wall. It fit. The angle was right. the bird's mouth seated cleanly on the wall plate. She had cut it correctly. Jacob smiled. Now cut 5 more exactly like it. By evening they had 2 pairs of rafters ready, enough for 1 truss. The problem was installation. Each truss needed to be lifted 12 feet and set precisely on the wall plates. That was normally a 3-person job. Jacob could not do heavy lifting anymore. His arthritis made it impossible. Catherine would have to solve that problem alone. She sat by the fire after Jacob left and thought about leverage. Stone masons understood leverage. You moved weights that no human could lift by using the principle of mechanical advantage. Long lever, short fulcrum, heavy weight became manageable. She could build a lifting system. The next 3 days, Catherine constructed what her father would have called a gin pole. 3 long poles lashed together at the top, standing in a tripod, a pulley at the apex made from a wagon wheel she found in the forest, someone's abandoned equipment from decades past. Rope through the pulley, one end tied to the rafter, other end tied to a bucket. Fill the bucket with stones until the weight balanced the rafter, then add more stones. The rafter lifted. It was slow, it was crude, but it worked. Catherine raised the first truss alone. 3 hours of patient work, adjusting the counterweight, guiding the rafter into position, securing it before moving to the next. By evening, the first truss stood. By the end of the week, she had all 6 trusses in place. The cabin had a roof frame. She stood in the clearing at dusk and looked at what she had made, the skeleton of a roof against the darkening sky, not finished, not covered, but structurally sound. Something built from nothing, from knowledge and effort and the refusal to accept that it could not be done. Catherine permitted herself a moment of satisfaction. Then she went inside and began planning the roof sheathing. The work continued. Each day brought new problems and new solutions. The roof needed sheathing. She had no money for boards, so she split more cedar, rough planks that she laid across the rafters and secured with wooden pegs she carved from scrap. The gaps between planks were too wide for weather resistance. She chinked them with moss gathered from the forest, packed it tight. It would not last forever, but it would last the winter. The window openings needed covering. She wove frames from cedar boughs, dense enough to block wind, open enough to allow some light. It was frontier work, honest about its limitations, but functional. By the end of November, the cabin was weathertight. Not beautiful, not refined, but sound. Catherine sat inside on a clear, cold evening, the fire burning, the roof overhead keeping out the weather, the floor solid beneath her. She had spent 6 weeks transforming a ruin into shelter. Had done it alone with hand tools and forest materials and knowledge passed down from her father and her husband. She took out Thomas's compass, opened it. The needle pointed true north as it always had. She thought about Thomas spending 27 years studying this cabin, trying to understand what made it exceptional. Now she understood. It was not the techniques, not the materials, not any single choice the builder had made. It was the commitment, the decision to build well even when no one would see it, even when easier options existed. The builder had cared. That was what made it exceptional. Catherine closed the compass, banked the fire, lay down on the sleeping platform she had built from split cedar. Outside, the November wind moved through the trees. Inside, the cabin was warm and dry and solid. She had built this. Tomorrow she would build more. But tonight she would rest. The stone walls stood around her, built by H.W. in 1847, restored by Catherine Morrison in 1891. Two builders separated by 44 years. Speaking the same language. Building the same way. With care. Winter came to the Cascade Mountains the way it always came, quietly at first, then all at once. Catherine woke on the first day of December to find 6 inches of snow in the clearing. The world had gone silent under its weight. Even the creek made no sound, its surface beginning to freeze along the edges. She built up the fire and stood at the door opening, watching the snow fall through gray morning light. The cabin held the heat now. The roof she had built kept the weather out. The walls that H.W. had raised in 1847 stood as solid as the day they were set. She had survived November. Now came the real test. The snow changed the rhythm of her days. Every morning she had to clear a path to the woodpile, had to break ice on the bucket to get water from the creek, had to work harder for everything that had been merely difficult before. But the cabin was sound. That made the difference between hardship and catastrophe. Catherine spent the short December days working on details. The interior walls needed chinking. Cold air came through gaps in the stonework where mortar had failed over decades. She mixed clay from the creek bank with dried grass and worked it into every crack she could find. It was patient work, the kind that required attention but not heavy labor. Her hands were better suited to this than to splitting timber in the cold. In the evenings, she continued reading Thomas's sketchbooks. She had been through all 12 volumes twice now, but each reading revealed something new. A note she had missed, a connection between drawings separated by years. On the 10th evening, she found something that made her stop. Volume 8, dated 1875, a series of sketches showing timber joinery techniques, nothing unusual. Thomas had documented hundreds of joints over his career. But on the bottom of one page, in smaller writing, almost an afterthought. Return to Cascade Cabin today. 19 years since first visit. Structure continues to stand despite complete roof failure. Wall plates show no rot. Stone courses remain true. Builder's identity still unknown. Have tried county records, land office, historical society. No record of homestead claim for this location prior to 1865. Cabin predates official settlement. Question remains: who builds this well in wilderness and then vanishes? Catherine read it 3 times. Thomas had been back. In 1875, 19 years after their honeymoon. He had hiked up here alone and measured the cabin again and tried to find out who built it. And found nothing. She turned pages, found more references. 1868, 1870, 1877, 1880, 1883. He had come back repeatedly, year after year, never telling her, just returning to this place, studying it, trying to solve the mystery of who H.W. had been. The last entry was dated April 1883, 1 year before Thomas died. Final visit to Cascade Cabin, too weak to make the climb again. Age or illness, unclear which. Have spent 27 years trying to understand this structure. Begin to think the understanding is not in discovering the builder's name, but in recognizing what the building itself teaches. Whoever H.W. was, he built with intention, every choice deliberate, every detail considered. The work is the legacy. The name matters less than I believed. Note to self: bring C here in spring, show her this place. She will understand it better than I ever could. She has her father's stone sense. I only borrowed it. Catherine closed the sketchbook. Thomas had planned to bring her here, had wanted to share this mystery with her. The sickness took him before spring came. She sat by the fire and felt the weight of conversations never had, plans never executed. The future they had assumed would be there and wasn't. But she was here now, in the place Thomas had studied for nearly 3 decades, sitting in a cabin he had never seen restored, finishing something he had started without knowing he had started it. The thought was strange and comforting at the same time. On the 15th of December, Jacob returned. Catherine heard him coming up the trail, the sound of careful footsteps in snow. She went to meet him. He looked older. The month between visits had taken something from him. He moved more slowly, breathed harder. But he had made the climb. "Jacob," she said, "you should not have come in this snow." "Probably not," he said, "but I told you mid-December. I keep my word." He carried a smaller pack this time, set it down inside the cabin with visible relief. "Supplies," he said. "Mary sends salt pork and dried beans in her regards. Also this." He pulled out a package wrapped in oilcloth. "What is it?" "Open it." Catherine unwrapped the cloth. Inside was a small box made of cedar, beautifully joined at the corners, dovetails so tight you could barely see the seam. She opened the box. Inside were 3 chisels, good steel, sharp edges, a mason's chisels. "These were your father's," Jacob said. "He left them to me when he died. Now I am leaving them to you." "Jacob, I cannot use them anymore. My hands shake too much for detailed work, but you can, they should be used." Catherine held one of the chisels. The handle was worn smooth from her father's grip. Decades of work had shaped the wood to fit his hand. Now it would fit hers. "Thank you," she said. Jacob nodded. Then he looked around the cabin, really looked. "You have done more than survive," he said. "You have built." "I followed Thomas's drawings." "Following them correctly is its own skill. Show me." Catherine showed him everything: the roof structure, the floor repairs, the window coverings, the clay chinking she had done. Jacob examined each detail, tested joints, sighted along lines, the thorough inspection of a craftsman who knew what mattered. Finally he straightened. "This is good work, Catherine, better than good. This cabin will stand another 40 years. It stood 40 already. I am just maintaining what H.W. built." "You are doing more than maintaining. You are honoring. There is a difference." They sat by the fire. Jacob moved slowly, settling himself on the stone hearth with care. "I need to tell you something," he said. Catherine waited. "This will be my last visit," Jacob said. "The climb is too much. My heart is not what it was. I can feel it. You should not have come today." I had to see what you built, and I had to give you the chisels." Jacob looked at her. "But I also had to tell you that what you are doing here matters, not just to you. People in town are talking about the woman who bought condemned property and vanished into the mountains, about how she must have failed by now. But Mary Chen tells them different. She tells them you are still here, still working, still building, and people listen when Mary talks because they know she does not lie. I am not trying to prove anything to anyone. I know that is why it matters." They talked through the afternoon, about stone, about building, about the difference between work done for show and work done for its own sake. As the light began to fail, Jacob stood to leave. "One more thing," he said. He reached into his coat, pulled out a folded paper. "What is this?" "Letter arrived at Mary's store addressed to you, from Seattle." Catherine took the letter, recognized Daniel's handwriting on the outside. "I have not opened it," she said. "Your choice, but it came, you should know." After Jacob left, Catherine sat by the fire holding the unopened letter. She did not want to read it, did not want to know what Daniel had to say. Their last conversation had been clear enough. He had taken her house. She had nothing more to discuss with him. But the letter was there, and not reading it would not make it not be there. She opened it. The writing was Daniel's, but not his usual precise legal script. This was hurried, almost frantic. Mother, I do not know if this letter will reach you. Mary Chen says you are alive and well, but will not tell me where you are. She says if you want me to know, you will tell me yourself. I need to speak with you, not about the house, not about the guardianship, about something else. Elizabeth has left me. She has taken Michael and Anna to her parents in Boston. She says she cannot respect a man who did what I did to you. She says I am weak, and that our children should not learn to be weak from watching me. She is right. I thought I was protecting you. I believed what Elizabeth's father told me, that elderly women cannot manage property, that it was my duty as your son to intervene. But I was lying to myself. The truth is I was afraid of what people would think if I did not take charge, afraid of being seen as irresponsible. I chose my reputation over your dignity. I do not expect forgiveness. I do not deserve it. But I need you to know that I understand what I did, and that I am trying to be better than I was. Your son, Daniel. Catherine read the letter twice, then folded it and put it in the fire. She watched it burn. Daniel's guilt was his own to carry. She had enough weight without taking on his. But part of what he wrote was true. He had been weak, and weakness had consequences. Elizabeth understood that. Catherine went back to her work. The winter days were short, dark by 4 in the afternoon. She had to be efficient with daylight. She spent the mornings on the final weatherproofing. The door opening still gaped. Cold air poured through. She needed a door. Lumber for a door required different work than lumber for roof sheathing. A door needed to be flat, needed to hang true, needed to seal against the frame. Catherine selected cedar boards from her stockpile, the straightest pieces, laid them side by side and joined them with cross braces. The work took 3 days, shaping the boards, cutting the braces, fitting everything together with wooden pegs she carved to exact size. When she was finished, she had a door, crude but functional, 6 feet tall, 3 feet wide, thick enough to hold heat. The hinges were the problem. She had no metal hinges, no way to get them. But her father had shown her once how Scots shepherds made door hinges from leather. Tough leather, oiled to resist weather, wrapped around wooden pins. She had no leather except her own belt. It would have to do. Catherine cut the belt into strips, wrapped them around cedar pins she had driven into the doorframe, attached the door. It swung stiffly, but it moved. She had a door. That evening she closed it for the first time. The cabin went from cold to merely cool. The fire's heat stayed inside instead of escaping into the night. She sat in the sealed space and felt the difference. This was shelter now, real shelter, not just walls and roof, but an enclosed space that held warmth and kept out weather. She had built this. The knowledge sat quietly in her chest, not pride exactly, something simpler, satisfaction, the kind that came from seeing a problem clearly and solving it correctly. Christmas passed unmarked except for the date in her notebook. December 25, 1891. Sunny, cold, chimney drawing well. She had never been sentimental about holidays. They were markers on the calendar, nothing more. New Year came the same way. January 1, 1892. The cabin stood, she stood, that was enough. The first week of January brought a cold snap. Temperatures dropped below 0. The kind of cold that made the trees crack in the night like rifle shots. The kind that killed if you were not prepared. Catherine was prepared. She had stockpiled firewood, had sealed every gap, had food enough for 2 months if she was careful. She stayed inside, fed the fire, did the detailed work that did not require being outside. One of those tasks was examining the chimney more closely. The chimney had worked perfectly since she cleared the flue in October, but she had never investigated the upper structure, the smoke chamber, the area above the firebox where smoke collected before rising through the flue. Standard practice was to build the smoke chamber with a shelf, a slight offset in the stonework that changed the chimney's internal dimension. The shelf helped create draw, helped prevent downdrafts. Catherine wanted to see if H.W. had built a shelf. She waited for a day when the fire had been out for hours, when the stones were cool enough to touch. Then she climbed onto a stool and reached up into the smoke chamber with her hand. Her fingers found the shelf, exactly where it should be, built with the same precision as everything else. But there was something else. A gap in the stonework, not damage, deliberate, a space where one stone should be but wasn't. Catherine felt carefully around the gap. Her fingers found the edge of something behind it, wood or leather, hard to tell. She got her father's smallest chisel, worked carefully at the mortar around the gap. After 10 minutes the stone came loose. Behind it was a cavity, deliberately constructed, a hiding place built into the chimney structure itself. And in the cavity was a package wrapped in oilcloth. Catherine's heart began to beat faster. She pulled the package out, carried it to the table, set it down carefully. The oilcloth was old, brittle, brown with age, but intact. She unwrapped it slowly. Inside was a leather journal, small, perhaps 6 inches by 8 inches. The cover was water-stained but whole. Below the journal were papers, rolled and tied with string that fell apart at her touch. And beneath those, a letter, sealed with wax. The seal was broken, but the letter was readable. Catherine opened the journal first. The handwriting was precise, controlled, the hand of someone educated when penmanship was considered a mark of character. The first page read, Henry Whitfield, Mountain Dwelling Construction, 1847. She had found the builder's record. Catherine sat very still for a moment. Then she began to read. The journal documented the construction of the cabin in methodical detail, each entry dated, each describing the day's work. April 3, 1847, began foundation excavation. Site elevation approximately 4,200 feet, southern exposure, natural drainage via North Creek. Soil test indicates bedrock at 18 inches. Will excavate to 30 inches for frost protection. Margaret says I am mad to build this far from settlement. She may be right, but the doctor says mountain air is her only chance. I will build her a house that stands. April 17, 1847, foundation complete. 30 stones set, each selected for weight and stability. Margaret supervised placement from her chair. Her strength fades daily. I work faster. May 1, 1847, walls rising, basalt from south outcrop. Dense stone, hard to work but will last. Margaret reads to me while I set courses. Her voice is weaker. I cannot think about that. I can only build. Catherine turned pages. The entries continued through summer, each describing progress, each mentioning Margaret. The woman H.W. was building for, the woman who was dying. July 4, 1847, wall plates set, roof framing to begin tomorrow. Margaret helped choose final course stones. She has better eye for color than I do. says even dying woman can outwork carpenter pretending to be mason. She is not wrong. Every stone I place is new learning. Every joint is prayer I get it right. August 12, 1847. Roof 3/4 complete. Margaret weaker each day. Sleeps most of the time now. I race against her death and losing. September 10, 1847. Margaret died this morning, in her sleep, peacefully. She never saw the roof completed. I buried her on the ridge above cabin, facing east toward the sunrise she loved watching. I cannot stay here. Every stone I placed was for her. Without her, this is just pile of rock. The next entries were sporadic, grief written in the gaps between dates. September 15, 1847, sealing this journal in chimney. Perhaps someone someday will find and understand. This cabin was built by man who loved his wife more than he understood stone. Every imperfect joint, every uncertain detail, that was me, learning as I went, racing against her death. But foundation is true. Walls are plumb, chimney draws. If you are reading this in house that still stands, know this. Love built it, not skill. I leave tomorrow. I cannot bear to stay. H.W. September 1847. Catherine closed the journal. She sat in the cabin that Henry Whitfield had built for his dying wife, that Thomas had studied for 27 years, that she had restored with her own hands. 3 people separated by decades, all connected by this structure, by the language of building, by the conviction that work done well mattered. She thought about Whitfield learning masonry as he built, making mistakes, getting better, driven by love and desperation. She thought about Thomas returning year after year, trying to understand what made this cabin exceptional. And now she understood. It was exceptional because it was built by someone who cared more about the outcome than about being seen to care. Someone who worked beyond their skill level because the need demanded it. Someone who built a legacy without planning to. The parallel to her own situation was too clear to miss. She had not planned to become a builder of consequence, had not sought to prove anything, had simply needed a place to be, and in making that place she had created something that mattered. The second package contained architectural drawings, Whitfield's original plans, what he had intended to build versus what he had actually completed. Catherine unrolled them carefully. The drawings showed a 2-room cabin, bedroom and main room separated by a wall, loft above for storage, root cellar below the north end, full roof with proper sheathing and shakes. She looked around the actual cabin, single room, no dividing wall, no loft, no cellar, rough roof that she had built to replace the one that failed. Whitfield had only completed the essential structure, the walls, the chimney, basic shelter. Margaret had died before he could finish. Catherine studied the drawings for a long time, measured distances with her eyes, compared the planned layout to the existing space. The bones were there. The walls told you where the dividing wall should go. The window placement indicated the loft height. The chimney position showed the room proportions. Everything you needed to finish Whitfield's design was built into what already stood. She pulled out Thomas's sketchbooks, found his detailed drawings from 1883, laid them beside Whitfield's plans. They matched. Not approximately, exactly. Thomas had reverse-engineered Whitfield's intention from the existing structure, had read the building like a text, and extracted the original design. 2 architects separated by 36 years, both looking at the same evidence, both reaching the same conclusion, both understanding the builder's language. Catherine traced the lines on both sets of drawings, Whitfield's plans, Thomas's analysis, her own hands that had restored the foundation. Three builders in conversation across time, speaking through stone and timber and the shared vocabulary of construction. She knew what she had to do. The third document was the letter addressed to M. Margaret. Catherine opened it carefully. The paper was fragile, the ink faded to brown, but readable. My dearest Margaret, if you are reading this, I have failed. You have passed, and I am writing to Ghost because I cannot bear to speak these words aloud. I leave this cabin unfinished because I cannot complete what I built for you without you. But whoever finds this, if anyone ever does, I want them to know the foundation will hold 100 years. The walls will outlast any timber structure. The chimney is sound. The stone courses are true. Everything needed to finish this house is in the design. The walls tell you where the loft goes. The windows tell you the roof pitch. I built in language that builders will understand. If you can read it, finish what I could not. Love does not end when the builder leaves. It continues in what was built well. Forever yours, Henry. Catherine read the letter 3 times. Then she understood fully. Whitfield had left instructions, not in words but in the structure itself. The cabin was a blueprint, a conversation waiting to be completed by someone who could read it. Thomas had read it, had understood the design, had documented it completely. But he died before he could show her. Now she held both sets of plans, Whitfield's original intent from 1847, Thomas's analysis from 1883. And she had the skill to execute what both men had envisioned, but neither had completed. She could finish this. Catherine stood and walked to the north wall, put her hand on the stone, felt the solidity of Whitfield's work. Whoever you were, Henry Whitfield, she said aloud, I hear you, and I will finish this. Not for you, not for Thomas, for the work itself, because it deserves to be completed, because half done is the same as not done when you are building something meant to last. That night Catherine made plans. She had supplies for another month. Jacob would not return. Mary Chen could not make the climb. She was alone. But she had everything she needed. Whitfield's plans, Thomas's drawings, her father's chisels, her own knowledge accumulated over 40 years of building. And she had the winter, the long quiet months when the world slowed and you could work without interruption. She would complete the cabin the way Whitfield had intended it. 2 rooms, proper loft, finished interior. She would build it true. The work began the next morning. First task was the dividing wall. It would separate the bedroom from the main living area. Whitfield's plans showed it positioned 12 feet from the south wall, load-bearing, stone base with timber frame above. Catherine had stone, she had timber, she had knowledge. She began. The foundation for the wall required digging through the existing floor, down to bedrock. She used her father's chisels to cut through the floorboards she had laid, cut them clean, removed the section where the wall would go. Then she dug. The ground was frozen at the surface, but her father had taught her how to break frost with fire. Build a small blaze, let it burn for an hour. The frozen earth softened. She excavated 18 inches down, hit bedrock, perfect. The foundation stones came from the creek. She gathered them one at a time, selected each for shape and size, carried them up to the cabin. The work took a week. By the end she had a foundation course running 12 feet across the cabin, level, true. Set in mortar she mixed from clay and sand. Next came the stone base of the wall itself, 3 feet high, solid masonry that would carry the timber frame above. Catherine built it the way her father had taught her, each stone placed deliberately, each joint checked for tightness, each course verified with the level. She worked alone. No one to hold the string line, no one to check her measurements, just her hands and her knowledge and the standards she held herself to. The wall rose one course at a time, patient work, precise work, the kind that could not be rushed. By mid-February, the stone base was complete, 3 feet of solid masonry running across the cabin, dividing the space exactly as Whitfield had planned. Catherine stood back and looked at it. The wall belonged. It had always belonged. The cabin had been waiting 44 years for someone to build it. Now it existed. She felt something settle in her chest, the satisfaction of work done correctly, of vision executed, of promise kept. Henry Whitfield had started this conversation in 1847. Thomas had continued it in his drawings. Now she was speaking in stone. The language was clear. The message was simple. Build well, build true, build to last. That was the only legacy that mattered. Outside, the February wind moved through the trees. Inside, the cabin was warm and the new wall stood, and Catherine Morrison knew with absolute certainty that she was doing exactly what she was meant to do. Tomorrow she would begin the timber framing for the loft. Tonight she would rest. The work would be there in the morning. It always was. The loft framing required mathematics that Catherine had not used in years. She sat by the fire with Whitfield's plans and Thomas's drawings spread before her. Both men had calculated the loft dimensions precisely. Floor joists 16 inches on center, headroom of 6 feet at the peak, load capacity for storage and occasional sleeping. The geometry was clear. The execution would be demanding. Catherine had timber, cedar she had split and shaped over the past months, but loft joists needed to be stronger than roof rafters. They would carry weight that moved, weight that shifted. She selected the densest pieces from her stockpile, sighted along each one for straightness, rejected any with significant warp or twist. By the end of the first day, she had 8 joists ready, each cut to exact length, each marked for position. The installation was the challenge. The joists needed to span 12 feet and rest on the stone wall she had built and on a ledger board attached to the opposite wall. All had to be level. All had to align perfectly. She worked alone. No helper to hold the far end while she secured the near. No second set of hands to check measurements. But she had solved this problem before with the roof trusses. Leverage and patience. Catherine rigged a temporary support from a vertical post and a crossbeam. It held the far end of each joist while she secured the near end. Then she moved to the other side and fixed it permanently. 1 joist per day, careful work, checked and rechecked. By the end of February, the loft framing was complete. 8 joists spanning the bedroom space, level within a 1/4 inch across the entire span. She decked it with the remaining cedar boards, laid them perpendicular to the joists, secured each with wooden pegs. When the last board was in place, Catherine climbed the ladder she had built, stood in the loft space, 6 feet of headroom exactly as Whitfield had planned. The space was small but functional, enough for storage, enough for sleeping if needed. She had built it true to the design, 45 years after Whitfield had drawn it, 8 years after Thomas had analyzed it. The cabin was becoming what it was always meant to be. March brought the first signs of thaw. The snow began to recede from the clearing. The creek ran fuller, ice breaking apart and tumbling downstream. The days grew longer by minutes that accumulated into hours. Catherine spent the longer days on finish work. The interior walls needed attention. The stone courses were sound but rough. Years of weather had pitted the surface. Gaps remained where chinking had failed. She mixed fresh mortar, Clay and sand and water worked to the right consistency. Not too wet, not too dry. The texture had to be perfect or it would crack as it dried. With her father's smallest chisel, she cleaned out the failed joints, removed old mortar that had turned to powder, got down to sound stone. Then she repointed, pressed new mortar into each joint, worked it smooth with a wooden tool she had shaped from cedar. The work was meditative, repetitive but requiring attention. Each joint needed the same care as the last. No shortcuts, no good enough. Her father had taught her this. Stone work is honest work, he had said. It shows every compromise you make, so make none. She made none. By mid-March, the interior walls were finished. Smooth joints, clean lines. The stone revealed in its full character. The cabin had gone from ruin to structure to dwelling, each phase building on the last, each adding refinement. Catherine stood in the main room and looked at what she had created. The stone walls that Whitfield had raised, the roof she had framed, the dividing wall she had built, the loft overhead. This was no longer a survival shelter. This was a house. Built by 3 people across 45 years, each contributing what they knew, each building on what came before. She felt Thomas's presence strongly in this moment, not grief anymore, something else. Gratitude maybe, for the drawings, for the obsession that had documented everything she needed to know. He had left her a gift without knowing he was leaving it, the gift of complete information, of careful measurement, of questions asked and answered over decades. She could finish this because he had done the work of understanding it. That was legacy, not inheritance, not property, knowledge passed through documentation, understanding preserved in drawings and notes. The kind of legacy that mattered. On the 20th of March, Catherine was splitting kindling when she heard voices in the forest. She stopped, set down the axe, listened. 2 voices, maybe 3, coming up the trail from below. She walked to the edge of the clearing, waited. 3 figures emerged from the trees, a man and a woman and a younger man, all breathing hard from the climb. The older man saw her first. His face registered surprise, then something like relief. "Mother," Daniel said. Catherine said nothing, simply stood and waited for them to come to her. Daniel looked thinner than the last time she had seen him, older somehow, lines around his eyes that had not been there before. The woman with him was Elizabeth, dressed for hiking, practical clothes, her hair pulled back severe. The younger man was Michael, 16 now, tall like his father, but watching everything with an alertness Daniel had never had at that age. They stopped at the edge of the clearing. No one spoke for a long moment. Finally, Daniel said, "We have been looking for you for 3 days. "Why?" Catherine said. "Because I needed to see what you built. Elizabeth said I had no right to ask, but Michael said he wanted to meet his grandmother, the real one, not the story I told." Catherine looked at Michael. The boy met her eyes, did not look away. "What story did he tell?" she asked. "That you were old and confused," Michael said. "That you needed care. That buying this property was proof you were not capable of making decisions." "He was wrong," Catherine said. "I know," Michael said. Elizabeth stepped forward. "Mrs. Morrison, I owe you an apology. I knew what Daniel was doing was wrong. I said nothing. I should have fought harder." "Why did you not?" "Because I was afraid of my father's judgment, afraid of what people would think." Elizabeth's voice was steady, even. "I was a coward. I am trying not to be one anymore." "That is why you left?" "Yes." Catherine nodded. Then she turned and walked toward the cabin. "Come inside." They followed. Daniel stopped in the doorway, stared. The cabin was warm, clean, organized. The stone walls gleamed from recent pointing. The loft overhead was visible through the open bedroom door. The fire burned steady in the hearth. "You built all of this," he said. "I finished what was started. There is a difference." Catherine gestured to the table. "Sit." They sat. She poured water from a pitcher into wooden cups she had carved over the winter evenings, set the cups before them. Michael was looking around the cabin with open fascination. His eyes went to the loft framing, to the joinery, to the stone courses. "This is beautiful," he said. "It is functional," Catherine said. "Function can be beautiful," Michael said. "Father says that is what architecture is, the place where function and beauty meet." "Your father said that." He quotes grandfather. He has all of grandfather's sketchbooks. He reads them every night. Catherine looked at Daniel. He could not quite meet her eyes. After Elizabeth left, Daniel said quietly, "I had nothing but those books. I read them trying to understand what Father saw in them, what he was trying to teach me that I was too stupid to learn." "And what did you learn?" "That I wasted 20 years practicing law when I should have been building. That I betrayed you to please people whose opinion should not have mattered. That I do not know who I am or what I am for." Daniel's voice was raw, unguarded in a way Catherine had never heard from him. "Elizabeth has agreed to see me again," he continued, "on condition that I figure out what kind of man I want to be, not what kind her father wants, not what kind looks good in Portland society, what kind I actually am." "And have you figured that out?" "No, but I think it starts with understanding what you did here." "What I did here is survive, that is all." Michael spoke up. "Grandmother, may I see the drawings?" "What drawings?" "Father said grandfather spent years documenting a cabin in the mountains, that he was obsessed with it. When we heard you bought condemned property, I wondered if this was the same place." Catherine went to the shelf where she kept Thomas's sketchbooks, pulled down volume 8, found the Cascade Cabin section, handed it to Michael. The boy opened it carefully, studied the drawings. His fingers traced the lines. "These are beautiful," he said. He understood the structure completely. "See how he notes the stone coursing here, how he calculated the loads. He reverse-engineered the entire design from what was left standing." "He did," Catherine said. Michael looked up at her. "Did you use these to rebuild?" "I used them to finish, along with the original builder's plans." "The original builder." Catherine retrieved Whitfield's journal from its shelf, handed it to Michael. The boy opened it, read the first page, his eyes widened. "This is from 1847. "Yes." "How did you find it?" "In the chimney, where Henry Whitfield hid it before he left." Michael read in silence, turned pages carefully. Elizabeth and Daniel watched him. Finally, Michael closed the journal, looked at Catherine. "He built this for his wife," Michael said. "She was dying. He was racing against her death, and when she died he could not finish it." Catherine nodded. "But you finished it," Michael said, "using his plans and grandfather's analysis. You connected what they both understood." "I did what needed doing." Michael stood, walked to the dividing wall, put his hand on the stone. "This is not just carpentry or masonry," he said. "This is translation. 3 builders speaking to each other across 50 years, using the language of structure." He turned to look at Catherine. "Grandmother, this is architecture, real architecture, not drawings on paper, not designs for clients. The actual conversation between builder and place and purpose." His voice carried conviction beyond his years. "This is what Father tried to teach me," Michael said to Daniel. "What you tried to teach me before you decided law was more respectable." Daniel's face went very still. "I am 16 years old," Michael continued. "I have one more year of school, then I need to choose. Mother wants me to go to university. Her father wants me to study business." He paused. "But I want to learn this. What grandmother knows, what grandfather knew, how to read a structure, how to finish what others started, how to build things that matter." No one spoke. Finally, Catherine said, "If you want to learn, you will work. No special treatment, no shortcuts. You will split timber and carry stone and dig foundations until your hands bleed. You will do it again the next day, and the day after that." "Yes, ma'am." "You will learn the mathematics, the geometry, the material properties. You will understand why things work before you build them." "I will." "And you will understand that this is not about becoming famous or respected or making money. This is about doing work that deserves to be done, for its own sake." Michael nodded. "I understand." Catherine looked at Daniel. "Do you give permission?" Daniel was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough. "I give permission, but I have a condition." "What condition?" "Teach me too." Catherine studied her son, this man who had betrayed her, who had taken her house, who had believed she was too old and too diminished to matter, but who had also read Thomas's sketchbooks every night trying to understand what he had lost, who had sent his wife and son to find her, who was asking not for forgiveness but for knowledge. She thought about Whitfield building beyond his skill because love demanded it, about Thomas studying for decades because understanding mattered more than pride, about herself restoring a ruin because there was nowhere else to go. Building was not about perfection. It was about showing up, about doing the work, about being willing to learn. "You will work twice as hard as Michael," she said to Daniel, "because you have twice as much to prove." "I know." "You will do exactly as I say, when I say it without question." "Yes." "And you will understand that I may never forgive what you did, but I am willing to teach you anyway, because teaching is not about liking the student. It is about passing on what should not be lost." Daniel nodded. His eyes were wet. "Thank you," he said. "Do not thank me yet. You have not carried stone uphill in the snow." Despite everything, Daniel smiled slightly. "No, not yet." That evening they all sat around the fire. Catherine made a simple meal from her supplies: beans cooked with salt pork, bread she had learned to make from flour and water and patience. They ate together, the first meal Catherine had shared with another person since Jacob's last visit. Elizabeth asked careful questions about the cabin, about the building process. She listened to the answers with real attention. Michael wanted to know everything: how she had split the timber, how she had framed the roof alone, how she had mixed mortar, how she had determined the loft dimensions. Catherine answered each question, showed him the drawings, explained the decisions. Daniel mostly listened, but once he asked, "Mother, when did you know you could do this?" "Do what?" "Build this, survive here, prove everyone wrong." Catherine thought about that. "I did not know," she said. "I simply did the next thing that needed doing, and then the next. Knowledge came from the work, not before it." "That is what Father's letter said," Daniel said quietly. "In his last sketchbook, the note to you, he said you would understand this place better than he did because you did not need to know you could do something before you did it." "He wrote that?" "Yes, at the end, 2 weeks before he died." Catherine had not read that far in the final sketchbook, had stopped before the end because reading Thomas's last entries felt too much like losing him again. Now she pulled down volume 12, turned to the final pages. Found Thomas's last entry, dated March 1884. Final visit to Cascade Cabin, too weak to make the climb again. Age or illness, unclear which. Have spent 27 years trying to understand this structure. Begin to think the understanding is not in discovering the builder's name, but in recognizing what the building itself teaches. Whoever H.W. was, he built with intention, every choice deliberate, every detail considered. The work is the legacy. The name matters less than I believed. Note to self, bring C here in spring, show her this place. She will understand it better than I ever could. She has her father's stone sense. I only borrowed it. And below that, in shakier handwriting as if written later when he was weaker. If I die before we make that trip, I hope she finds her way here anyway. Not because I want her to finish what I studied, but because I want her to know the work is not about being perfect. It is about being true. She has always been truer than me, braver, more willing to attempt what she did not know she could do. That is mastery, not perfection, courage in the attempt. I hope she builds something impossible. I hope she proves everyone wrong who ever doubted her. Because she can. TM March 1884. Catherine read it twice. The fire crackled. No one spoke. Finally, she closed the book. He knew, she said quietly. Knew what? Michael asked. That I would end up here. That I would need to build something. That the building would matter more than the loss. She set the sketchbook back on the shelf. Your grandfather was a wise man, she said to Michael. Wiser than I gave him credit for. Will you teach us what he knew? Michael asked. I will teach you what I know, Catherine said, which is not the same thing, but it is what I have to give. That is enough, Michael said. They stayed that night. Catherine gave them the loft. She slept by the fire as she always did. In the morning she woke to find Daniel already up. He had rebuilt the fire, had water boiling, was attempting to make coffee. The coffee was terrible, but the attempt mattered. Over breakfast, Catherine laid out the terms. Michael and Daniel would return to Seattle, would settle their affairs. Michael would finish his school year. In June they would return, would spend the summer learning. Catherine would build a second cabin, smaller, for family use when they visited. Michael and Daniel would do most of the work. She would supervise. They would use Whitfield's techniques, Thomas's documentation, her father's standards. They would build it right. By the time they left that afternoon, the plan was clear. Catherine stood in the clearing and watched them disappear down the trail. Elizabeth had hugged her. Michael had shaken her hand formally. Daniel had said nothing, just looked at her, and nodded. She went back inside. The cabin felt quiet after the voices. But it was a good quiet, the quiet of work ahead, of purpose renewed, of knowledge that would not die with her because she had found someone to teach. Spring moved into the mountains. The snow disappeared entirely. The meadow turned green. Wildflowers appeared, purple lupin, yellow glacier lilies. The forest came alive with bird song. Catherine spent April on final details. A proper ladder to the loft to replace the rough one she had built, shelving along the walls, a better table, chairs that did not wobble. Each project taught her something, each added to her skill. By May the cabin was complete, not just functional, finished, every detail resolved, every surface considered. She stood outside one evening and looked at it. The stone walls solid in the late light, the roof she had framed, the door she had hung, the chimney drawing perfectly. This building had been condemned. Everyone had assumed it was worthless, beyond saving. She had proven them wrong. Not with speeches, not with arguments, with work, with knowledge applied, with standards maintained. The cabin stood as evidence, solid, true, built to last. On the 1st of June, a letter arrived. Mary Chen had sent it up with a trapper who was passing through. The man delivered it and left quickly. Mountain people understood about not intruding. The letter was from Elizabeth. Mrs. Morrison. We arrived June 15th. Michael has finished school with honors. Daniel has closed his law practice. We are coming to learn. Michael asks if he should bring tools. I told him you would provide instruction on that. Daniel asks nothing, but he works in our garden every day, building raised beds, getting his hands ready. I am bringing my camera. I hope to document what you teach them for the family record. We will see you in 2 weeks. With respect, Elizabeth Morrison. Catherine read the letter twice, then she began to plan. A second cabin would require foundation work. She would need to teach them how to read the ground, how to find bedrock, how to set stone. They would need to learn timber selection, how to judge grain, how to see weakness before you cut. They would need to understand joinery, mathematics, load calculation. There was so much to teach, more than one summer could hold. But summers could be repeated, years could be dedicated, knowledge could be passed completely if the students were willing. She thought about her father teaching her in the Aberdeen stone yard, patient instruction, high standards, the expectation that she would meet them. She thought about Thomas showing her how to read a drawing, how to translate 2 dimensions into 3, how to see what the builder intended. She thought about Jacob giving her his tools, passing down what he could no longer use. Legacy was not property, it was this, teaching, the patient transfer of knowledge from one generation to the next, the refusal to let skills die. Catherine went to her notebook, began to sketch the second cabin, smaller than the first, but built to the same standards. She would teach Michael and Daniel to build it, every step, every joint, every decision. They would learn by doing, by making mistakes and correcting them, by holding themselves to standards that did not bend. By the time they finished, they would know what she knew, would be able to read structures the way she read them, would understand the language that Whitfield and Thomas and she herself spoke. The conversation would continue. On the 15th of June, Catherine stood in the clearing and waited. She heard them before she saw them, voices carrying up through the forest, Michael's young tenor, Daniel's deeper tones, Elizabeth's occasional comment. They emerged into the clearing carrying packs. All 3 looked tired, but they had made the climb. Michael saw her first, his face lit up. He dropped his pack and came forward. "Grandmother," he said, "we are here to learn." "Then we begin," Catherine said. She led them to the site she had chosen for the second cabin, 30 yards from the first. Good southern exposure, level ground, close to the creek but above the flood line. "This is where we build," she said. Michael and Daniel set down their packs, stood looking at the site. "First lesson," Catherine said, "before you build anything you must understand the ground beneath it. You must know where bedrock is, how water flows, what the frost will do." She handed Michael a shovel, Daniel a pry bar. "We start by learning what we are building on. Dig test pits, 6 of them, 3 feet deep. Show me what you find." They worked. Catherine watched, corrected technique, showed them how to read the soil layers, how to recognize bedrock, how to see the truth of what lay beneath. By evening they had completed the test pits, were exhausted, hands blistered. But they had learned the first lesson. You could not build on assumptions. You had to know. That night they sat around the fire. Elizabeth had brought real food, fresh bread, cheese, dried fruit. They ate well. Michael asked, "How long did it take you to build the first cabin?" "I did not build it," Catherine said. "Henry Whitfield built it in 1847. I restored it. That took from October to March. 5 months." "Working alone?" "Yes." Michael looked at the cabin, then back at her. "We will do better," he said. "You will do different," Catherine said. "You have help. I had only necessity." "Necessity is the best teacher," Daniel said quietly. Catherine looked at her son. "That is true." They sat in the firelight, 3 generations, bound by blood but more importantly by purpose. Tomorrow they would dig foundations, would set the first stones, would begin the conversation that would continue as long as they were willing to speak it. The language of building, of care, of work done to standards that did not compromise. Catherine looked at the first cabin, solid against the darkening sky, then at the ground where the second would rise. 2 cabins, 3 builders from the past, 3 learning from the present, and whoever would come after them. The work would continue. That was legacy. Not buildings that bore your name. Knowledge that outlived you. Standards that did not fall. The fire burned low, the stars came out. Catherine banked the coals and told them to rest. Tomorrow the real work began. And tomorrow came early in the mountains. The foundation stones for the second cabin went into the ground on the 17th of June, 1892. Catherine stood over the first test pit and pointed. Daniel and Michael looked down at the layers of soil and stone exposed by their digging. "You see this," she said. Her finger traced a line in the earth. "This is where glacial till meets bedrock, 3 feet down. That is where we build." "Why there?" Michael asked. "Because everything above moves. Frost heaves it in winter. Water undermines it in spring, but bedrock does not move. Bedrock is truth." She had them dig 5 more test pits across the cabin footprint. Each one confirmed the same depth. Bedrock at 3 feet. "Now you know what is under you," Catherine said. "Now you can build with certainty." They spent 3 days excavating the foundation trenches. Daniel learned quickly that a lawyer's hands were not prepared for this work. Blisters formed, then broke, then formed again underneath as calluses began to grow. He did not complain. Catherine watched him work through the pain with something like respect growing in her chest. He was soft, but he was trying. Michael worked with the intensity of youth, too fast at first. Catherine had to slow him down. "Pace yourself," she said. "This is not a race. You must be able to work tomorrow and the day after. Steady effort over time builds more than frantic effort that exhausts you." Michael adjusted, learned to work at a sustainable rhythm. Elizabeth documented everything with her camera, box camera, glass plates. She set up shots carefully, Catherine laying out the foundation corners, Daniel and Michael setting the first course of stone, the cabin rising stone by stone. "Why do you photograph this?" Catherine asked. "Because no one will believe it otherwise," Elizabeth said. "A woman of 67 building in the wilderness, teaching 2 men who should have known better than to need teaching." She looked at Catherine directly. "This matters, not just to our family, to everyone who has been told they are too old or too diminished or too whatever to do the work they know how to do." "You sound like Jacob." Jacob was right. The foundation rose through late June, each stone selected, each placed deliberately. Catherine showed them how to read the stone, how to see which face wanted to be exposed, how to know when a joint was tight enough. Never settle for close enough, she said. Close enough fails, true holds. Daniel struggled with this. His law training had taught him that approximation was acceptable, that close enough was professional. Stone does not care about professional, Catherine said. Stone cares about true. She made him reset a corner stone 3 times before she approved it. The 4th placement was perfect, level in all directions, bearing evenly on the course below. That is right, she said. Daniel looked at the stone, then at his bleeding hands. I understand, he said. What do you understand? Why you would not compromise, why close enough was the same as failure. He met her eyes. I am sorry, Mother, for all of it. Catherine was quiet for a moment. Sorry does not rebuild what you tore down, she said, but work does. Keep working. By the first week of July, the foundation was complete. They built a fire and sat around it in the evening, tired, sore, but satisfied. Tomorrow we frame, Catherine said. The timber framing taught Michael mathematics he had never fully understood in school. The angles mattered. The Pythagorean theorem was not abstract. It was the difference between rafters that met cleanly at the ridge and rafters that left gaps. Catherine showed him how to calculate the cuts, how to mark them, how to verify before sawing. Measure twice, she said, cut once. Timber does not forgive mistakes. Michael measured carefully, marked precisely, cut slowly. His first rafter fit perfectly. The look on his face when he test-fitted it was something Catherine remembered from her own youth. The moment when theory became reality, when understanding moved from the mind to the hands. That is building, she said. They raised the frame over 2 weeks. The small cabin took shape, walls 8 feet high, roof pitch of 6 and 12, the same proportions as the first cabin but scaled down. 20 feet by 16 feet, enough for sleeping quarters, for storage, for family use when they visited. Daniel learned slowly but thoroughly. He did not have Michael's quick grasp of geometry, but he had something else, persistence, the willingness to repeat until he got it right. Catherine found herself watching him with complicated feelings. This was her son who had betrayed her, who had taken her house, who had believed she was too old to matter. But he was also Thomas's son, working with his father's tools, learning what his father had tried to teach him 20 years before. Some lessons came late, but they came. By the end of July, the second cabin was framed and roofed, not finished, but weather-tight. They stood back and looked at what they had built together. It is good work, Catherine said. Michael beamed. Daniel nodded quietly. Elizabeth took a photograph, the 3 of them standing in front of the cabin, Catherine in the center, stone dust on her hands, teaching complete. That evening, a visitor came up the trail. Catherine heard the footsteps and knew immediately, steady pace, familiar rhythm. Mary Chen emerged into the clearing carrying a heavy pack. Mary, Catherine said, you should not have climbed this far. Mary set down the pack with visible relief. I am 49, not 90. I can walk uphill. She looked at the second cabin, then at Daniel and Michael, then back at Catherine. You have been busy, she said. Teaching. Good, someone should learn before you die and take it all with you. Mary pulled items from her pack, real coffee, sugar, salt, flour, dried meat, luxuries from town. Also this, she said. She handed Catherine a letter. From whom? Government, Bureau of Land Management. They want to talk to you about the property. Catherine opened the letter, Read it twice." "What does it say?" Michael asked. "They want to survey the land. Something about disputed title, native claims, historical significance." "Are you in trouble?" Daniel asked. "I do not know." Mary sat by the fire. "I heard talk in town," she said. "Some official came through asking about condemned property purchased last year, asking who bought it, where they went." "What did you tell them?" "That condemned property gets bought all the time, that I keep no records of who goes where." Mary looked at Catherine. "But they will find you eventually. Government always does. You should be prepared." "For what?" "For them telling you this land is not yours, that you have no right to be here, that you need to leave." Catherine looked at the two cabins, at the work of 9 months, at the knowledge passed to the next generation. "I am not leaving," she said. "Good," Mary said, "then we fight." The government surveyor arrived on August 3rd. His name was Robert Hendricks, mid-30s, educated, carrying instruments in a leather case and maps in a tube. He introduced himself politely, then asked to see the property boundaries. Catherine showed him, walked the perimeter that the original deed described. 18 acres total, most of it forest, the cabins in the clearing. Hendricks took notes, made measurements, asked questions. "Who built these structures?" he asked. "The first cabin was built by Henry Whitfield in 1847. I restored it last winter. The second cabin I built this summer with my son and grandson." "You built them?" "Yes." Hendricks looked at her, at the cabins, back at her. "Ma'am, I have to tell you there is a problem with your title." "What problem?" "This land was never properly ceded to the United States. The Salish people claim it as traditional territory. Your purchase at the tax sale may not be valid." Catherine felt something go cold in her chest. "What does that mean?" "It means the federal government is reviewing all land claims in this area. If the tribal claim is upheld, you may be required to vacate." "When?" "The review could take months, maybe a year, but you should be prepared for the possibility." After Hendricks left, they sat around the fire in silence. Finally, Michael said, "Can they really take it?" "If the land was never legally available to sell," Catherine said, "then yes, they can take it." "What will you do?" Elizabeth asked. "I do not know." Daniel spoke up. "I know someone, a colleague who specializes in land law. I can write to him, see what options exist." Catherine looked at her son. "Why would you do that?" "Because I owe you," Daniel said simply. "Because I took your house and I cannot give it back, but maybe I can help you keep this." That night Catherine lay awake thinking. She had built on this land for 9 months, had transformed ruin into dwelling, had taught the next generation, had found purpose after loss. And now it might be taken. Not by malice, by law, by the same legal system that had taken her first house. The irony was not lost on her. But something else occurred to her, as she lay there listening to the forest sounds. Maybe ownership was not the point. She had come here with nothing, had built something, had passed knowledge forward, that had already happened, could not be undone. Whether she owned the land or not, the work was real, the teaching was real, the cabin stood. That mattered more than any deed. In the morning, she told Daniel not to write his letter. "Why not?" he asked. "Because I did not build this to own it. I built it because it needed building." "But if they take it from you?" "Then they take it, but they cannot take what I learned or what I taught you. That leaves with us." Michael protested. "Grandmother, you earned this. You should fight." "I have fought enough," Catherine said. "I am 67 years old. I have proven what I needed to prove to myself. That is sufficient." In September, a letter came from the Bureau of Land Management. Catherine read it with Daniel and Michael, looking over her shoulder. The letter said that the tribal claim had been reviewed, that the Salish delegation had presented historical evidence of continuous use, that the federal government was inclined to recognize the claim. But there was more. The tribal council had been informed of Catherine's presence, of the restoration work, of the historical significance of the Whitfield cabin. The council wished to meet with her. They came on the 20th of September. 5 men, elder council members, led by a man named Joseph Silverthorne, perhaps 70 years old, moving with the careful dignity of age and authority. Catherine met them in the clearing, offered water, gestured to the fire. They sat. Silverthorne spoke first. "Mrs. Morrison," he said, "we have heard about what you have done here. I restored a cabin that was falling down. You did more than that. You found Henry Whitfield's journal. You documented his work. You preserved something that was being lost." He paused. "Whitfield came to our people in 1846, asked permission to build on this land, said he needed high air for his sick wife. We granted permission. He was respectful, learned our plant knowledge, shared his own knowledge of stone building. When his wife died, he left. We assumed the cabin would return to the forest. That is the way of things." Silverthorne looked at the restored cabin. "But you brought it back, and in doing so you honored what he built, what we allowed him to build." "I did not know about the permission." "We know, but you acted as if you did, with respect, with care." Silverthorne leaned forward slightly. "The land belongs to our people. This is true. The government now recognizes this. But we do not wish to remove you. You have been a good steward. You have taught others. The cabin stands as witness to a time when our people and settlers could work together in respect. We wish to allow you to stay, for your lifetime, to continue teaching, to maintain what you have built." Catherine was quiet for a long moment. "Why would you do this?" she asked. "Because Whitfield honored us by asking permission. You honor us by preserving his work. Honor deserves honor. And after my lifetime, the cabins will remain, as teaching station. Your grandson, if he wishes, can continue the work. We will oversee it together." Michael stepped forward. "I wish it," he said. Silverthorne looked at him. "You will learn our ways also, our knowledge of this place. Building is not just timber and stone." "I will learn," Michael said. "Then it is agreed." They worked out the details over the next hour. Catherine would have life estate, could teach as she wished. Michael would apprentice not just with her but with tribal builders, learning multiple traditions. After they left, Catherine sat by the fire for a long time. She had come here with 50 cents and nothing else, had expected nothing except to survive the winter. Now she had purpose, had students, had respect from people she had never met. Not because she demanded it, because she had done the work. That was how it should be. October brought the first serious cold. Catherine knew what that meant. The teaching season was ending. Daniel and Elizabeth would return to Seattle before the snow. Michael wanted to stay, but Catherine insisted he finish his education first. "You will return in spring," she said. "You will work summers until you know what I know. Then you will teach others. But first you finish school." Michael agreed reluctantly. On their last evening they sat around the fire in the main cabin, the one Whitfield had built. the one Catherine had restored, the one that had started everything. Elizabeth had developed some of her photographs. She showed them around the fire. Catherine saw herself through Elizabeth's lens, an old woman covered in stone dust, hands scarred, face weathered, standing in front of a cabin that should not exist. She looked capable, not despite her age, because of it. 67 years of accumulated knowledge written on her face and hands. That is who I am, she thought. That is what I built. Daniel spoke quietly. Mother, I need to say something. Catherine waited. I cannot undo what I did, he said, taking your house, believing you were diminished, making choices for you that were not mine to make. No, Catherine said, you cannot. But I can promise this. I will spend the rest of my life trying to be the man you raised me to be, the man Father tried to teach me to be. He gestured at the cabins. You have shown me what that means, not through words, through work, through standards that do not bend, through teaching when you had every right to refuse. Catherine looked at her son, really looked at him. He would never be Thomas, would never have that instinctive understanding of structure and beauty, would never be a natural builder. But he was trying, and trying mattered. You have learned something, she said. That is more than you knew before. It is a beginning, Daniel said. Beginnings are sufficient. They left the next morning. Catherine stood in the clearing and watched them walk down the trail. Daniel, Elizabeth, Michael. 3 people who had climbed up as strangers and were leaving as students. Mary Chen came once more before the heavy snow. She brought winter supplies and news from town. People are talking about you, Mary said. The woman who bought condemned land, who survived alone, who built 2 cabins, who is teaching the old ways. Let them talk. Some say you are crazy. Some say you are remarkable. Both groups tell stories about you. Stories are cheaper than stone, Catherine said. I prefer stone. Mary laughed. That is why the stories matter, because you do not care about them. She pulled out a final item from her pack, a letter, addressed to Catherine in formal script. Who is this from? Catherine asked. Washington Historical Society. They want to designate the Whitfield cabin as historical site, want to put marker, want to document it. Do I have to agree? You own life estate, you can refuse. Catherine thought about that. Whitfield had hidden his journal in the chimney because he thought no one would care, thought his work would be forgotten. Now people wanted to remember it, wanted to mark it as significant. He would have appreciated that. Tell them yes, Catherine said, but tell them the marker must acknowledge 3 builders. Henry Whitfield, who built it, Thomas Morrison, who documented it, and Catherine Morrison, who restored it. All 3 or no marker. Mary smiled. I will tell them. After Mary left, Catherine spent the evening reading Thomas's sketchbooks one more time. She had read them dozens of times now, but they still revealed new things, small notes in margins, observations she had missed. In the final volume, she found something she had not noticed before. A loose page tucked between the back cover and the binding, a letter not sealed, just folded. Addressed to her. She opened it. Thomas's handwriting, dated March 1884, the month before he died. My dearest Catherine, if you are reading this, I am gone, and you have likely found your way to the Cascade cabin. I do not know how or why, but I know you, and I know you well enough to believe that somehow the cabin and you would find each other. I spent 27 years studying that place, trying to understand what made it exceptional. Only at the end did I realize it was not the techniques, not the materials, not any single choice the builder made. It was the commitment to building well even when no one was watching, even when easier options existed, even when there was no reward except the knowledge that you did it right. That is who you are, Catherine. That is who you have always been. I fear I took that for granted, assumed you would always be there, strong, capable, requiring nothing from me except respect for your work. I should have told you more often how much I admired what you could do, how your father's stone sense ran truer in you than in anyone I ever met, how watching you work taught me more about building than any book or teacher. I am sorry I will not be there to see what you build next, but I know it will be exceptional, not because you try to make it so, because you cannot build any other way. Build something impossible, my love, prove them all wrong. You can. Thomas. Catherine read the letter 3 times. Then she folded it carefully and placed it with Whitfield's journal and her father's chisels, the items that mattered, the inheritance that was not property but knowledge. She sat by the fire and thought about the 3 men who had shaped her understanding of building. Her father, who taught her to read stone. Thomas, who taught her to see structure. Whitfield, who taught her, across 45 years, that love and skill were not separate things. All 3 were dead, all 3 lived in her hands. That was legacy, not buildings, not land. Knowledge embodied, carried forward, passed on. She banked the fire and went to sleep. Winter came hard that year. Catherine was ready. She had firewood stacked 8 feet high, had food for 4 months, had shelter that would hold against anything the mountains sent. She spent the short days on small projects, carved wooden bowls, made better furniture, refined details that did not need refining but that satisfied some need for perfection. In the evenings she wrote, not a journal exactly, more like documentation, how to select stone, how to read grain in timber, how to calculate loads, how to see what a structure wanted to be. She was writing a manual for Michael, for whoever came after Michael, so the knowledge would not die. Her hands cramped from writing, but she kept at it, page after page, knowledge extracted from 40 years of practice, written down, preserved. On Christmas she was alone but not lonely. She made a small meal, sat by the fire, thought about Thomas, about the Christmases they had shared, about the quiet companionship of long marriage. She missed him, would always miss him, but the missing had changed, was not sharp anymore, was more like the ache of well-used muscles, present but not debilitating. She had built a life after loss, had proved she was not diminished, had taught the next generation. Thomas would have approved. Spring came late in 1893. The snow held until April. When it finally melted, the clearing turned to mud, then to grass, then to flowers. Catherine was 68 years old. She felt it in her joints, in the way she moved more slowly in the mornings, in the effort required for tasks that had once been easy. But she could still work, still build, still teach. Michael returned in May, alone this time. He had finished school, had told his parents he was spending the summer learning. He was taller, broader, more man than boy now, but still carrying that intensity, that hunger to understand. Catherine put him to work immediately. They built a workshop, small structure, storage for tools, workbench for detail work. She taught him finish carpentry, joinery, the patient work of making things fit perfectly. Michael learned quickly. His hands were young, strong, but he had the patience of someone older, the willingness to repeat until right. By June, he could cut dovetails that Catherine could not distinguish from Thomas's work. That is skill, she told him. Tribal builders came in July. 2 men, James Silverthorne, Joseph's son, and an elder named William. They taught Michael their techniques, how to work with green timber, how to bend wood, how to build with what the forest provided. Catherine watched and learned alongside Michael. She was never too old to learn, never too experienced to recognize superior knowledge. The three traditions merged: Scottish stone sense, Thomas's architectural precision, tribal forest craft. Michael absorbed all of it, synthesized it, began to see connections that none of them had seen individually. "This is what architecture should be," he said one evening. "Not just one tradition, all of them speaking together." "Yes," Catherine said. In August, a man came from the Washington Historical Society. He was young, earnest, carried a notebook and measuring tools. His name was Robert Davies. He had been sent to document the Whitfield cabin for their records. Catherine showed him everything: the journal, the original plans, Thomas's documentation, her restoration work. Davies was thorough, measured everything, photographed everything, asked detailed questions. Finally he said, "Mrs. Morrison, this is remarkable. Not just the cabin, the complete documentation, the connection across generations." "It should be documented," Catherine said, "so it is not lost again." Davies nodded. "We would like to publish this in our quarterly journal with your permission." "You may publish it, but you must include all three builders: Whitfield, Morrison, equal credit." "Of course." "And you must include the tribal permission. The Salish people allowed Whitfield to build. That is part of the story." "Absolutely." After Davies left, Michael said, "You will be famous." "I will be documented," Catherine said. "There is a difference." They worked through September, building, teaching, learning. Catherine felt time pressing, not urgently, but present. She was 68, in good health but aware that good health was temporary, that age took what it wanted. She wanted to ensure Michael knew everything before time ran out. They worked longer days. She showed him everything she knew, every trick, every technique, every bit of knowledge her father and Thomas and 40 years of practice had given her. Michael learned it all, wrote it down, drew diagrams, asked questions until he understood completely. By October he was ready. "You know what I know," Catherine told him. "You are no longer student, you are builder." Michael looked uncomfortable with that. "I have so much more to learn." "Everyone does, but you know enough to teach. That makes you builder." "What will you do now?" "I will build until I cannot build anymore. Then I will watch you build. That is enough." The marker was installed on October 15, 1893. Exactly 2 years after Catherine had bought the property. Simple granite stone, professionally carved, set at the edge of the clearing. It read, "The Whitfield Cabin. Built 1847 by Henry Whitfield. Documented 1856 to 1883, by Thomas Morrison. Restored 1891 to 1892, by Catherine Morrison. Maintained in partnership with Salish people. Washington Historical Site number 43. Catherine stood looking at it for a long time. 3 names, 3 builders, 3 parts of one conversation. Michael stood beside her. "Will you stay here?" he asked. "Yes, this is home now." "What should I do?" "Build something, somewhere, pass forward what you learned. That is how knowledge stays alive." "I will." They stood in silence. Then Michael said, "Grandmother, thank you." "For what?" "For teaching me, for not giving up, for showing me what matters." Catherine looked at her grandson. This young man who carried forward three traditions, who would build things she would never see, who would teach students she would never meet. "You are welcome," she said. That was enough. The years that followed were quiet ones. Catherine lived in the main cabin, maintained both structures, taught students who came to learn. Michael visited every summer, brought friends, colleagues, people who wanted to understand the old ways. The cabins became known, a teaching site, a place where knowledge was preserved and passed on. Catherine turned 70, then 71, then 72. Her hands grew more arthritic. Her knee that had complained for years began to refuse work entirely. She moved slower, worked shorter days. But she still built, still taught, still maintained standards that did not compromise. On the morning of her 73rd birthday, she woke to find she could not rise from her bed without help. Michael was there. He had come early to celebrate with her. He helped her to a chair by the fire. "I am old," she said. "You are skilled," Michael said. "Age is just time passing." Time has passed enough. They sat together, Catherine looking at the cabin she had restored, at the work of her hands, at the legacy she had built. "I am content," she said. Michael understood, did not argue, simply sat with her. Catherine Morrison died 3 days later, peacefully, in the cabin Henry Whitfield had built for love, in the space she had restored with skill, surrounded by evidence of work done well. Michael buried her on the ridge above the clearing, next to where Whitfield had buried Margaret, facing east toward the sunrise. The marker was simple stone, carved by Michael's own hands. Morrison, 1824 to 1897. Mason. Builder. Teacher. Michael stayed at the cabins, made them his life's work, taught there for 40 years, trained hundreds of students in the three traditions. The cabin stood, generation after generation, maintained, preserved, teaching. In 1954, the Washington State Historical Society designated the site as permanent monument, not just to Whitfield, to all three builders, to the conversation across time, to the knowledge that refused to die. The cabins still stand today, still teach, still speak the language of building done with care. Catherine Morrison built them, not alone, never alone, but with the skill of her father, the documentation of her husband, the intention of a stranger who died before she was born. Three became one, one became three, the conversation continued. That is legacy. Not property, not fame, not monuments bearing your name. Work done true, knowledge passed forward, standards that do not fall. The stone remembers who shaped it. The stone stands. And that is enough.